cannot call up, that which you cannot put down.
Back when I was 18, me and my pals, Sarah and Mark, got curious about the supernatural. We heard from people at school about using a Ouija board. It was supposed to let us talk to spirits. We figured, why not give it a try? It seemed harmless enough. One weekend, we gathered at Sarah's place. Mark had bought a Ouija board from a store. I'm not sure exactly where. Since it was bought from a store, we didn't really think anything was going to happen. So we went all out. We turned off the lights, lit some candles, and waited until 12 a.m. I don't know why, it just seemed appropriate. We all put our hands on the Ouija board, fingers on the planchette. We began by Sarah asking, "Is anyone here?" To our surprise, the planchette moved. We weren't sure if Sarah or Mark was moving it. We asked some more questions like, "What's your name?" The planchette spelled out R-E-B-E-C-C-A, Rebecca. None of us knew a Rebecca. Then it started getting weird. It spelled out things it shouldn't know, like personal stuff from our lives. That made us uneasy. How could it know about my dog that passed away when I was 6? The room felt different, cold and like someone was watching. We asked, "Are you a good spirit?" The planchette moved to no. Fear started to creep in. We said goodbye and tried to move our hands, but the planchette refused. It kept going back to no. We felt trapped, a knot in our stomachs. It spelt D-I-E. We were scared now, not sure what to do. We didn't want to anger anything and we couldn't see or understand. We removed our hands, but the planchette stayed put. The air felt thick, heavy. We heard whispers like distant voices. I felt goosebumps rise all over my skin. Sarah said, "We need to burn this thing." So we did. But the fire went out as if it didn't want to be burned. Panic set in, a dreadful feeling taking over. The shadows in the room seemed to dance, making the fear worse. We wanted to leave, but something held us back. We heard footsteps, but it was just us in the house. We huddled together, trying to stay calm. We didn't know what to believe or what to do. The room felt like it was closing in on us, suffocating. We grabbed a candle. Its flickering light offered a bit of solace. Time passed slowly, the shadows fading as dawn approached. We were exhausted, drained from the ordeal. When morning came, we made a promise to never mess with that Ouija board again. The memory of that night still lingers. As I look back at that time, now being 46 and a mother myself, I'm thankful we made it through, relatively unharmed. It taught me that some things are better left untouched, and curiosity can lead to dark places. Back in high school, my buddy Jake and I considered ourselves goths and were super edgy. One Halloween night, we were bored and decided to do something spare of the moment. Jake had an old Ouija board, so we decided to go to the old cemetery and try it out. We'd heard the cemetery was haunted, but we didn't really believe in all that spooky stuff. We met up at dusk, sneaking through the graveyard gates. The air was chilly and the moon cast eerie shadows. A perfect setting for a Halloween adventure. We placed the Ouija board on a flat tombstone. Jake was excited, grinning like a fool. We put our fingers on the planchette, and I asked, "Is there anyone here who would like to communicate with us?" To our shock, the planchette started to shakily move. It moved to yes. We figured the other was pranking, but we both swore we weren't. If there's really someone with us, please give us a sign. The planchette started to move again. It spelled out H-E-L-L-O. And then a small pebble audibly clattered off a nearby tombstone. That sent shivers down our spines. Jake then asked, "Who are you? Could you tell us your name?" The planchette spelled out S-A-M-U-E-L. We didn't know any Samuel. The graveyard felt different, heavy, like we were being watched. It may have been my imagination, but I was sure it felt colder, and the air was heavier to breathe. Curiosity got the best of us, so we kept asking questions. Samuel knew things he shouldn't, like my grandmother's name who had passed away, and Jake's mother's maiden name. Fear crept in, but we kept going. Then, things got darker. Samuel spelled out G-E-T-O-U-T. Get out. We were taken aback, but also stubborn. We asked why. It responded with D-A-N-G-E-R. Danger. Just then, the air went icy, and shadows seemed to come alive. We heard whispers and footsteps all around us, but no one was there. The weird thing was the whispers were seemingly in our ears at times, like someone was whispering into them, even though we were the only two there. Jake was freaked out, and so was I. We tried to end the session, but the planchette wouldn't move. Panic set in, our hearts racing. It spelt F-O-L-L-O-W. We didn't want to, but we had no choice. We grabbed the board and ran. The atmosphere was suffocating, and the shadows chased us. It felt like they were right behind us, trying to grab us. As we dashed through the graveyard, we heard a wailing sound, like a ghostly cry. We didn't look back. We were too terrified to see what was pursuing us. Finally, we reached the gates, and as we crossed, we heard a loud thud. We glanced back, and there at the entrance was a figure, misty and ethereal. We screamed and bolted. We didn't stop running until we reached Jake's house, hearts pounding, breathless. Back then, we weren't the athletic type, so I vomited a little bit from the overexertion. We knew that we had narrowly escaped something. That Halloween taught us a lesson. Some things are better left untouched, whether you believe in them or not. We don't talk about it much these days. I'll never forget that ghostly chase in the old graveyard. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences, and I've told others about them over the years, but I've never actually written them down before. I guess these posts are my way of recording them, even just for myself. Anyway, here's my story. It's long, so I apologize for that right now. I tend to ramble, but I remember this so incredibly clearly. When I was around 11 years old, I went to Lake Tahoe over the summer with my best friend, who I'll call Emma, and Emma's parents and younger brother. We stayed at a cabin for about a week or so. Emma and I got bored easily. This was the 80s, so there was no internet. I don't think we even had HBO. Her mother suggested we poke around in the cabin's closet for a game, and that's where we found a Ouija board. Being 11-year-old girls, we opened that bitch up quicker than you can say, "They're here." Now, I feel I should mention that my mum and my grandma both used a Ouija board and tarot cards, so that coupled with the many ghost experience I've had growing up, and still do, made my brain see an old, dusty Ouija board and think, sweet, let's use it. Emma and I made contact with 3 spirits who were all children. The first was a girl who was around 10 years old, I believe, and without giving too much away, she had been a minor child star who had died in an accident. She gave us details that we learned only later when we looked her up. I remember really liking her and thinking we would have been friends if she was still alive, and that weighed so heavily on me. The survivor's guilt, when I hadn't even been in the accident myself, but I remember feeling it. Yet the vibe from her was so loving and pure, like a regular kid, but also a literal angel. I'll call her Jane. Emma and I then contacted 2 other kids. I don't remember their names, but the boy was older, maybe around 12 or 13, and had died in the 1970s or early 80s, from what we could guess. I'll explain more about this later. There was also a young girl, I think about 8, who was from the 1870s. I remember thinking she was like Little House on the Prairie. The boy was sort of looking after the girl, I think, because he was older, and I never figured out how they got paired up, but Jane wasn't paired with them. They all 3 interacted with each other comfortably though. That sounds so weird, I know. Anyway, I had a camera, the old-fashioned kind that took film you'd have to develop, and we told them to sit on the couch. We assumed they had, and I snapped a photo. Now, what I'm about to say is something I hope to prove soon. I took a photo, and in it you can clearly see 2 of them. The boy, dressed in a t-shirt with a beach type of logo design, and shorts that were definitely from around 1980, give or take a year or 2. The girl, sitting next to him, was wearing a long-sleeved dress that hit at her ankles and a bonnet. She was leaning into him, like a big brother, and he always seemed like he took his job of being her protector very seriously. We never connected with either of them apart, but we did connect with them, and not Jane, and vice versa, meaning these 2 were never apart. I don't think I realized that until just now. I showed the photo to my mum, and she took it for safekeeping. I never found it. My hope is that I somehow saved the negatives of the film so I can have them printed again. But I've honestly looked off and on throughout the years and haven't found it yet, so I don't know. I know this is a huge claim, so ignore it if you're skeptical. I would be. I'd want to see proof if someone said they had proof, and I would find it funny that I couldn't locate the proof now. I get it. That's why I'm saying I understand if you doubt I took this photo. I hope to prove it to you though, because this photo was so clear. Not like actual people, they're definitely spirits. The amount of detail that was visible was astounding, if I remember correctly. I want nothing more than to find this photo again. You have no idea. Anyway, our trip ended and we said goodbye to them. We were both really sad. We'd become friends with them, as much as you can when you're 11 armed with a Ouija board and a dream. A year or so later, another friend of mine got a Ouija board. I was a terrible influence. I see that now. I called for Jane and we connected with her. I tried to check up on her every so often over the years. My heart broke for her. It still does. It was different with Jane than with the other 2 spirits. They all resonated love and I felt a strong sense of protection from them. We used the Ouija board all the time during that trip, and I remember them telling us that bad spirits were trying to get through, but they were blocking them out. The bad spirits were attached to the cabin but couldn't make direct contact unless you helped them. The Ouija board was the bait. Apparently a lot of people took the bait before us and had terrible experiences because of it. But since Emma and I had called out only for very specific good spirits, we got the first 3, and they blocked out the bad ones. I remember the bad ones almost got through, and there was some sort of a struggle. My God, I never realized what truly happened until just now. Writing that out just blew my mind. There was a struggle. I remember them telling us. Emma and I were scared. Some weird activity happened, but quickly stopped. The bad ones were blocked out, but we got the feeling they couldn't hold them back forever. It was like they were holding that door shut with all their strength, just to spend time with us. I got the feeling that they hadn't interacted with other kids in a long, long time, and they were all so genuinely good, like literal angels. Jane's spirit was the strongest. She had a brighter white light, like starlight around her. I later learned she was quite a philanthropist and little activist. I still feel like she would have made a lot of change had she still been alive. I'll never understand why she was taken from this world with a light that bright. It's so hard to explain. The other two, they were lights too, but seemed like ghosts to me. Jane's whole presence was stronger somehow. Her energy and love was so strong it was palpable. I sometimes wondered if the world just wasn't ready for her yet. Hers was a light that would change the world. We weren't evolved enough for someone like her, not yet anyway. That's my story. More like a novel, so I apologize for the length of this post. If anything, I got to share this story, and also make some realizations about this experience. So I think I have a lot to process here. Thanks for listening. This happened a few years back when I was younger and stupider. So there we were on a lazy Sunday night. Me, Laura and Tom. All of us in our early 20s. Looking for something to shake off the boredom. Tom at the time lived in this old creaky house, which supposedly had a spooky history. It was dirt cheap, so he didn't seem to mind. He didn't really have the money to mind anyway. The previous tenant had passed away about 10 years ago, which, honestly, always creeped us out a little bit. That night, we were so bored with so few things to do. Laura suggested that we should use a Ouija board to try and contact the previous tenant. None of us had a Ouija board, but Laura knew how to make one, so we went about doing it. I wasn't too sure about it, but after a bit of convincing, I agreed. Tom, being Tom, was all for it without a second thought. We dimmed the lights, creating a moody atmosphere that was more out of boredom than anything else, and gathered around the homemade paper board, placing our hands lightly on the coin we used for a planchette. The air was thick with anticipation. Laura started. "If there's anyone here, give us a sign." Minutes passed, and we were about to give up, when the makeshift planchette suddenly moved. We exchanged shocked glances. It was actually happening. I then asked, "Who are you?" Z-O, Z-O, it spelled out. I shivered. I'd heard about that name before, a supposed malevolent entity known to haunt Ouija board sessions. The makeshift planchette then started to go around the board, wildly forming a figure 8 pattern. Panic started to set in, but we all tried to play it cool. "Why are you here?" Laura asked, hesitantly. D-A-R-K, it spelled. Dark. That was unsettling. "Can you tell us more?" Tom chimed in, trying to mask his unease. The planchette began moving faster, almost forcibly, spelling out disturbing phases and doing the figure 8 pattern. It mentioned things about shadows, death, and wanting to come into our realm. I could see the fear in Laura's eyes, and Tom was starting to look pale. In a moment of courage or sheer stupidity, I blurted out, "Are you good or evil?" The question hung in the air as a chilling silence settled over the room. Suddenly, the planchette began to move with an eerie intensity. It spelled out E-V-I-L. Fear gripped us as the room grew colder, and it darkened despite the absence of any external light source. Whispering voices filled the air, sending shivers down our spines. The Ouija board seemed to take on a life of its own as the planchette moved frantically, continuously moving in a figure 8 pattern. A menacing presence seemed to surround us, or at least it felt so, and the temperature dropped. We realized with a mix of fear and excitement that we had unwittingly summoned something dark. Shadows danced on the walls, and a guttural voice emerged from the board, but we couldn't make out what it was saying. We hastily tried to close the session, but whatever was controlling the board resisted our efforts. It seemed to grow stronger, and the room managed to get darker. In a final spine-chilling message, the board spelled out, "There is no escape." But as time passed, the torment did not continue. Instead, we felt an eerie sense of being watched by unseen entities. Shadows still moved mysteriously. Whispers of despair seemed to echo in the dark. After that, our lives became a living nightmare. We continued experiencing these shadows moving and whispering in our own homes for weeks after the session. It wasn't just me losing my mind, all of us were experiencing it. In the middle of the night, they'd be knocking on our doors, on windows. Shadows would seem to move around our rooms, and there would always be that whispering when we were alone. Desperate to rid ourselves of this entity, we sought the help of a priest. None of us were religious at the time, but we didn't know what else to do. Over a couple of sessions, the priest prayed over us and conducted some rituals. To be honest, I don't really know what he did, but it seemed to deteriorate over time. I don't know what you believe, but whatever the priest did, it worked. He scolded us about using such a thing, but in the end, we were free of that entity. We were all exhausted after that ordeal. We had narrowly escaped the grip of that entity, and through the intervention of the priest, we were free from its torment. I'll never touch a Ouija board ever again for as long as I live. I've had a few bad experiences with the Ouija board in my time. I vowed I'd never do it again. When I was about 23, I was staying with a friend whose house was most definitely haunted, especially the kitchen, which was right under my room. I heard all sorts of noises coming from down there at night, when I knew she was asleep and her 3-year-old son was in the room next to mine with a baby gate on it. The first time anything happened, it wasn't a true Ouija in the fact that we used candles to communicate instead of a board, with just yes-no answers. There was just me and my friend. The other two were in the kitchen with the door shut, and her son was asleep in bed upstairs. You could not get upstairs without coming through the room we were in. We started asking questions and eventually we were getting answers. Then we asked if this was a friend that had died, and if it was, could they make the candles move? We had 2 in the middle of the table and 8 around the outside. As soon as we said that, there was like a swirl in the air around us, and each candle in turn flickered. Up to date, it's the most unexplainable night to happen to me. So then I stared at one of the flames and asked if the person who was there could put it out. Neither of us was sat near the candle I asked to be blown out. Then it just started getting dimmer and dimmer, and poof, it went out. We were both excited but a bit creeped out at the same time. Then there was a huge bang from upstairs. My friend went to check thinking her son had fallen out of bed. She came back down white, saying he was asleep, but a load of books from his box were scattered all over the room. They hadn't been when she put him to bed. Then the scariest thing ever happened. There was another loud thud upstairs, and then very loud thumping footsteps down the stairs. and the handle on the door at the bottom started rattling. Only for a few seconds, but there was no one there to rattle it. I opened the door, no one there. Then, just to top the night off, my phone was on top of the TV, which was off. It was 2 a.m. at this point, and it started ringing. I wondered who could be ringing me at 2 a.m. unless it was an emergency. I got up to get my phone, and the number on the display said 0 over 10 times, and nothing else. Well, that was it. I lost it. I've spent the night in haunted houses, derelict mental hospitals, etc., but this night scared the hell out of me. When I answered, it was just static, and then cut off. Then on a different night, the same friend said she wanted to try a Ouija board in her house. I said I'm not taking part, especially because of everything that had happened last time. So her and her auntie did it while I sat on the sofa drinking a beer and playing on my phone. We went up to bed around 1 a.m. Her auntie was sleeping on the sofa downstairs. I woke up at about 2 a.m. to the bed shaking. Me, being half asleep, was thinking, what the hell have they released from that Ouija board? I came to, and the room was shaking, and I could hear the pipes banging under my floor. It was an old house. Then, it just suddenly stopped. If I hadn't been drinking, I was ready to nope the flip out of there. But I don't drink and drive. Anyway, the next morning on the news, it turned out there'd been an earthquake right at that time I woke up. I've never been so glad for a normal explanation for something. That one's a bit more light-hearted, but still scary at the same time. Both of these stories are 100% true. I like to believe in the supernatural, but I'm also very science-minded, and I find rational reasons for things happening. So it takes a lot to prove to me that something has no explanation. That first night was one of those times, and 13 years later, I still can't explain it. Hi all. Thought I'd share something interesting that happened to me about 15 years ago. Most won't believe me, but for what it's worth, I promise everything I tell you is 100% true, and how it happened to the best of my memory. However, names have been changed. I was about 18 and I was hanging out at my friend Joanne's house with some other school friends. Can't quite remember how we got onto the subject, but towards the end of the evening, Joanne thought it would be funny to perform a seance. Joanne and her family were from Cape Town, South Africa, and they had a deep-rooted interest in the spiritual, or at least that's what Joanne made out to us. With the lights off and candles lit, we all sat at a round table, with cards fanned out around the edge. Each card had a letter of the alphabet arranged A to Z and a shot glass placed in the middle. Joanne starts, speaking out to the spirits in Afrikaans. I remember pulling a face and rolling my eyes. It was too dark for anyone to take offense. At the time, I was an insufferable, enlightened, atheist teen dork. You know the type. Cringy 4chan edgelord who thinks any form of spirituality or religion is beneath me and my superior intellect. I never wore a fedora, but I was damn close. However, what was about to happen made me question everything. It started mundane enough. A few questions were asked, and the shot glass we were resting our fingers on started to move to and fro, until eventually one of my friends asked the spirit if they were associated with anyone in the room. The shot glass moved directly towards me. Incredulous, I asked the spirit, if you're associated with me, then what's my mother's maiden name? My eyes fixate on the letters that spell out her maiden name, Jones. But the glass started spelling out something different. First, the glass went to T, then H, then O. I thought then it was bullshit, as it was completely wrong. But then, I was struck by a horrific realization. When my mum was 6 months old, her biological father died of a heart attack, and a year after that, she took her stepfather's name. I completely forgot this in the moment, as I was expecting the glass to read out the maiden name she had for the majority of her life. But it was actually spelling out her original maiden name of Thompson. It was a fact so trivial that I barely remembered it myself. It was something never talked about, even within my family, as it happened so long ago. It would be hard to believe that any of my friends would know this esoteric piece of my family's history that occurred 20 years before I was even born, but nonetheless, somehow, it was being spelled out in front of my very eyes. Thompson. My school friends and I wouldn't talk about anything deeper than video games and tits at that age, yet there's no way I ever mentioned this to any of them. It's not like one of my pot-smoking loser friends had a copy of my mum's birth certificate, and none of them had ever met anyone else in my family. There was literally no way anyone could have known this. Before I could contemplate this for too long or ask any other questions to my ghostly associate, Joanne's mum came into the room, and she turns the lights on and, with a thick South African accent, shouts something like, "Bloody hell, Joanne, stop messing around with this silly crap," and put a definitive stop to the proceedings. Of course, at the time, I played it off as a prank, but the more I think of it, the more my mind wanders. Did something actually paranormal happen that night? I know it's nothing dramatic or exciting. I didn't even see an apparition or a cryptid. But unlike 90% of the shit you read on Reddit, this experience is actually true, and something, to this day, I can't explain. When I was in college, I had a roommate who was really sweet and gentle. I loved her. She was a great person, but extremely simple, if you know what I mean. One night on the weekend, we decided to make a Ouija board because we were bored. It started out pretty much not doing anything, but after a few minutes, it started moving, except only when my roommate was touching it. It wouldn't move at all for me. I know it wasn't her doing it because I started asking questions about myself she wouldn't have ever known, and it was answering everything correctly. It spelled out my mother's name, who I didn't even talk to, and had never told her or anyone there about. It knew what city I was from, even though I had just told everyone I was from Boston because it was just easier. It knew my father's name, who died when I was only 9 months old. It knew everything. After a few questions though, it started to spell out strange stuff like people and places that weren't really local or relevant to either of us. According to the board, it was supposedly a kid, and they said they died on a river, and all this stuff. But it started turning dark, so I just cut it off, and was like, we're done. I said my goodbyes and decided to put it in the trash. But my roommate was still acting weird. She had this, dark demeanor about her, which is literally nothing like her. I was like, what the hell is going on with you? She just said it was nothing and laid down on top of her covers and everything. So I shrugged it off and went to the lobby of the dorm to watch TV. Later that night, when I went to bed, she was still laying in that same position. But I just decided to ignore her and go to bed. That night, I couldn't sleep and kept seeing a black figure pop out of the bathroom doorway that was placed directly in front of my bed, so eventually I got up and got a Bible from the RA. That apparently didn't help my case because the little shit started moving around on my desk to the point where I went and slept on the couch in the lobby. My RA really didn't want to let me, but I told her I'm not going back in there until either God himself shows up or sunrise, because we messed up and something isn't right. Eventually I did end up back in my room, and I did fall asleep out of pure exhaustion. But that girl literally never went back to being that sweet little mouse she always was. And even to this day, she's just so different. I feel bad because nothing happened to me the way it affected her. But I didn't intend on anything to happen like that. I felt literally nothing when we touched the board, except a weird rocking back and forth in my body that wasn't visible to my roommate. When I touched the cup we used, I felt nothing and it didn't move or anything. Only for her. Very weird and will never happen again, as far as I'm concerned. When I was 15, Paranormal Activity came out. My friend and I decided to try the Ouija board. We spoke to this guy named Frank, and I remember he used to say messed up things like,
My mum is standing behind you, and she doesn't like you.
and
I'll overdose on pills.
just weird dark stuff. But my friend and I both thought we were messing with each other, trying to freak each other out. A few weeks later, I was sleeping in bed. I had a shelf above my bedhead that had my graduation teddy from primary school sitting on top. The teddy has sat there for years without being moved. And there was a dresser with a mirror at the end of my bed. I woke up to the teddy falling on top of my head, and when I would wake up, I would be waking up looking directly into the mirror. There, I saw a girl brushing her hair in front of my dresser. I rubbed my eyes numerous times, and instead of her disappearing, she became more clear. But the more I stared, it was like I was looking at myself when I was even younger, like 6 to 7 years old. As she had thick auburn hair, but was wearing a very old style type of nightgown. I soon realized it wasn't. I hid under the covers, and after checking numerous times to see if she was gone, she finally disappeared. This fully freaked me out. Anyway, we stopped doing the board and did other things normal teenagers do. I never told anyone about what I saw, except for a few friends, but put it down to I was seeing things and I was still dreaming. Fast forward 11 years, I'm now 26. I picked up my sister and was driving her home, and she randomly starts talking about when my friend and I played the board. And she's like, Josie, my other sister, and I swear you brought something into the house. I shrug and I'm like, why do you think that? And she's like, we used to wake up seeing a girl brushing her hair in front of us. I slammed the brakes and was like, WTF? And she's like, yeah. She didn't say or do anything, just brushed her hair. And then I fessed up that I saw her too, but I thought I was dreaming. Anyway, we both haven't seen her for many years, which I consider lucky because I don't want anything in the house. But I must admit, it does still freak me out, and I really don't want to see her again. This happened to me when I was around 12 to 13 years old. I'm 23 now, and these events still loom over me. So at the time, I was living in Virginia with my parents and 2 step-siblings. We had recently moved into a newly built townhouse development. Our townhouse had 3 floors in total. The upstairs area is where the bedrooms were located. The living room and the kitchen were on the main floor, and the basement was my sister's room. At the time, I was becoming increasingly interested in the paranormal. I would watch all sorts of ghost shows on television. Eventually, I learned what a Ouija board was. I wanted one, but I knew I wouldn't have the means to buy a real one myself, and I knew my parents would not approve. So I opted to make my own. I created a template on a piece of cardboard, carefully replicating what a real one would look like. For the planchette, I used a small square-shaped lid that was the perfect size. I heard that it wasn't safe to use it by myself. I didn't have any friends in the area at the time, so I asked my sister if she would try it with me. She was reluctant at first, but after some convincing, she was game. Her uncle had recently passed a few months prior, so we decided to try and contact him. We set up the board in the basement, her bedroom, with a picture of her uncle next to us. We both lightly put our fingers on the makeshift planchette, and I began to ask questions like, Uncle, are you here with us tonight? To both of our surprise, it did not take long to get a response. The planchette moved to yes with force. At first, I assumed that my sister was messing with me, but soon I would be proved wrong, because she started crying very hard. After a few more questions with responses, my sister informed me that she wanted to stop. I don't remember what else we asked, because it was so long ago, but I do remember that the planchette would move with haste after every question we asked. We ended up by informing her uncle that we were leaving and moving the piece to goodbye. Afterwards, it took some time for my sister to calm down, and I was pretty blown away myself. Strange things started happening to me almost immediately after. After we'd finished using the board, we both went upstairs to calm down and watch TV. 30 minutes later, I heard a bang come from the basement. I went downstairs to investigate and found that the planchette had moved from goodbye to no, and the picture on the wall had fallen down. This disturbed me, so afterwards I opted to tear up the board and throw it away. After I did this, I assumed that was the end of it, and for my sister it was, but I didn't know that this was the beginning of months of pure terror for me. I don't know why, but whatever this thing was attached to me. My sister didn't have any odd occurrences afterwards. Meanwhile, I started noticing strange things happening. It started small at first. I noticed our family dog would all of a sudden refuse to come into my bedroom. I would pick him up and take him into my room anyways, and when he was in there, he would act very strange. His ears would stick straight up, and his eyes would fixate on a certain corner in my room. He would whine and bark, and occasionally his head would dart around like he was watching something move around. Then, I was sitting in my room another day on my own. I was watching TV and laughing at the show I was watching. My school binders were sitting all the way at the foot of my bed, and I was sitting at the head of the bed, a good distance away. One of my binders slid all the way across my bed, hitting me in the arm. This freaked me out, and I informed my parents, but they told me that I was just imagining things. Weird things like this kept happening to me. One time I walked into the kitchen during the day by myself, and a sponge that was sitting on the dining room table suddenly flew across the whole room with force. I continued to experience things like this, and they started becoming more frequent. I talked to my sister about it, and she told me that nothing odd was happening to her. I was a mess at the time. I did not want to go home, and would often try and go to a friend's house after school instead, which most of the time didn't work out. I talked to my parents again, and go figure, they thought I was making it up for attention again. After a little bit of going through it, I had the most terrifying night of my life. This event still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. It traumatized me, and although I've worked past it for the most part, I still try not to think about it. I've only told a few people in my life about this because it sounds like a straight-up lie. This night was the climax of my experiences. After this happened, the activity completely stopped. One night, I was laying in my bed. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep, so I was just laying there. My whole family was asleep, and the house was completely dark. I slept with my door open at the time, and the only light source was a blue light emanating from my radio in my room. It was just bright enough to illuminate my room. I had my blanket over my head, covering half of my face, but I could see my room from waist height down to the floor. To my horror, as I laid there with my eyes open, a black figure entered my field of vision near the foot of my bed. It was right next to my bed. There was no color on whatever this was. It was pure pitch black with no obvious features. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream or move. I just laid there as I watched this thing slowly move down my bed until it stopped right in front of my face. I then felt a hand placed on my head through the blanket that was over me. The hand rested there for a second, and then began moving in a circular motion for a few seconds. Eventually the hand lifted, and I watched the dark figure slowly move away and then out of the room. This was the last thing that ever happened. After that, it just completely stopped as fast as it started. This whole ordeal has had a huge impact on my life. This is the first time I'm sharing this story online. I haven't tried until now because I did not want to type it out and relive it. But now, I'm more curious as to what the hell happened to me, and what that thing was. I think that I should also add that aside from anxiety and depression issues, I'm mentally sound. I've never experienced hallucinations or delusions, and I know that what happened to me was real. I'm posting this not only to share my story, but to also gain insight from others. What do you think this could have been? Could it have been a demon? And has anyone listening to this had any similar experiences? I wish I could be more detailed, but it's been so long, and I've largely tried to forget about this time in my life. Thanks in advance. In fall of 2018, I started my freshman year of college. To preface, the dorm building I moved into was a renovated seminary building, aka a school where men would go when they wanted to become a priest, on the banks of the Mississippi River. The seminary school was originally built in the early 1800s, but closed years later, and my college purchased it in the 90s. They renovated it and then opened it in the early 2000s, dedicating the campus to fine arts students. The dorm hall was one of 3 buildings on the campus. The building's first floor held classes and the dining hall, and the second and third floor were the dorm rooms. This meant my 8 a.m. was a literal elevator ride away, total plus. The doors were suite style, so I had a roommate, 2 suite mates, a living room, kitchenette, and a bathroom. I'm sorry this portion was so long, but the details are important. Upon moving in, things were normal for the first couple of days. Then weird things started happening. My decor started falling off the walls, even though my roommates and I all used the same command strips. The most notable being my wooden cross I hung up next to my closet. I would hear running and the fridge slamming outside my room when I was certain my roommates had all gone to class. I would nap and wake up to my room door being open when I knew for a fact I shut it, and you needed a key card to the room to open it. Each of these I rationalized. I heard the fridge slamming because one of my roommates came up from the class to grab a drink or food and needed to get back. Both of my suite mates were dancers, so this didn't seem too far-fetched. However, the second week of school, my suite mate thought it would be a good idea to put all of our schedules in the fridge, so we would know when the others were in class. This is when I realized that the times I had been hearing the fridge slam shut and running, I was in fact the only person in the room. I even asked my roommates if they had come back, and they said they hadn't. That night started a week-long streak of waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. I would wake up around 3 a.m. feeling like someone was pushing on my chest, and I couldn't move or breathe. One of the nights, the last, was so bad, once I was able to move, I ran to the bathroom and sat under cold water and called my mum, bawling. Not the kind of call she thought she was going to get from her college freshman at 3 a.m. The next day, when my roommate got back from class, she told me about a student she overheard, wondering what students had moved into our dorm room number because she wanted to talk to us. About half an hour later, this really petite girl shows up at our dorm room, asking if anything weird has been happening, all while staring intently at me. Obviously, I say yes, and then she proceeds to tell me what happened the year prior. The group of people who lived in our room the year prior used a Ouija board and accidentally ended up drawing up a malevolent spirit into the room. She explained that she was in touch with the spirit realm and didn't think the entity was still there, but its energy remained along with some others that were drawn to it, one of these energies being a woman. Then she focused all of her attention on me and said, "It's been picking on you, hasn't it?" I then proceeded to explain everything that had been happening, to which she responded that she could tell that it was targeting me because I had a very bright light energy. However, she paused for a second before stating that she felt a protective energy with me in the room and asked if I had any relatives pass away recently who may be protective over me. I immediately responded yes, as I have had many family and friends pass over my lifetime. But what she asked next gave me chills. She proceeds to ask, with her head cocked, if my relative's name was John. My grandpa John passed shortly after I was born. I barely knew him, and there was no way she could have known his name. Stunned, I nodded and she explained not to worry too much, because he was just there to protect me. After that, she left. My roommates and I kind of made it all into a joke, mostly because I think we were freaked out and knew we had to continue living in the room until the end of the school year. We stupidly gave the female ghost a name, Avery, and deemed her an honorary roommate to try and lighten the situation. Later that week, my roommate and I were sitting in bed when a mirror of mine fell off the wall. I, frustrated that this was only ever my things that fell off the wall, yelled, "Damn it, Avery!" And instantaneously my cross fell off the wall. However, when I went to pick it up, I noticed the command hook was still on the wall, meaning my cross couldn't have just fallen off. It would have had to have been lifted off the hook in order to fall. My roommate and I looked at each other, jaws dropped, and erupted into a fit of nervous laughter. After that, nothing ever really happened again. The next semester, one of my suite mates commented that we haven't heard from Avery in a while. The following morning, I was headed out the door to go to class and walked by one of the mirrors in the dorm room. In the reflection of the mirror, I caught a glimpse of a pale woman with long dark hair and a white nightgown standing right behind my shoulder. I skeeted out of the dorm room so fast and did not look back. The next day, my roommates and I were all sitting in the living room, and the one who made the comment about not hearing from Avery said, "Oh, by the way, I saw Avery today." The entire room went quiet, and each of my roommates' faces went pale. I quietly said, "I did too," followed by my other roommates stating the same. We exchanged what we saw and when, and each of us saw the same thing. That truly was the last time we encountered Avery. When we moved out in the spring, we decided that was her way of saying goodbye to us. I will always wonder, though, if the students who moved in after my roommates and I ever experienced anything. So, about 2 years ago, my nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I've always been a true believer of the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I've heard and read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly, they kind of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would just be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my 2 cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother, 11, and my cousin, 12, bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it, and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain to them it wasn't just a game, and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things they shouldn't do. One day, after I got home from work, the boys were there, and I had this sneaking suspicion they played with it. I looked under my bed, and it was there, but I had this odd feeling about it. That's when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it. At first, they denied it, but I saw right through them, and they finally admitted that they had played with it. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they said they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time and make things up and be overly dramatic. So when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that's what was happening. Anyways, a couple of nights later, I got into bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I get this feeling that I'm being watched. I look over at the closet, which has 2 sliding doors, and I notice one of the doors is slightly opened, leaving a small space between the doors. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and fall asleep. I finally fell asleep, and the next thing I know, I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. I was laying on my back, so the back of my head was fully on my pillow, which made it even weirder, and it wasn't a light hit either. It freaked me out so much I was shaking. I look around my room and don't see anything. But then, all of a sudden I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. I'm so freaked out at this point, it wasn't funny. After laying there for a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to the living room. I sat down and tried to calm down. I could still feel a tingling, pulsating sensation on the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it's 3 a.m. I called my boyfriend, now husband, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what happened because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would say I was acting stupid. After she got up, I had breakfast and then called my boyfriend again, and he finally picked up. He told me he had his phone on silent mode, so he didn't know I had been calling. I gave him so much crap for this, let me tell you. I told him what happened, and he felt so bad and felt like an idiot for having his phone on silent. He told me he would have come in a heartbeat to comfort me and was so apologetic. Later that day, he came over and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My husband is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything again after I got rid of the Ouija board. Moral of the story? Ouija boards should not be messed with. This is a fairly short story. I'm currently a 19-year-old female. When I was younger, my mum unwillingly gave me her old Ouija board, the one she used when she was a kid, so around sometime in the 80s. I started playing around with it when I was probably 11 or 12. Anyways, I'd always been fascinated with ghosts and spirits, anything to do with the paranormal. Although I didn't really know much about Ouija boards then, I also didn't know how to properly use one. So long story short, I think as a kid I might have let lots of spirits through or something, cause since then I've had lots of unexplainable experiences. There's always one that comes to mind. It was around the time I was about to move, because for some reason that increased the activity. My mum was out to get teriyaki for dinner, and I was watching television in the living room. It was around 6 p.m. in the evening. I was laying on the couch watching my favorite cartoon when I got this feeling of panic. I felt as if something was watching me. I even heard the floor creaking, like there was someone in the bathroom hallway. I remember turning down the TV and looking over at the other couch where my 2 dogs were momentarily sleeping, their ears slightly shifting around. I heard what I thought sounded like the closet doors slowly open, and all of a sudden, I heard a loud thump. My dogs woke up and frantically jumped off the couch and started barking. They started running for the front door like someone was there. I quickly sat up and turned around. I was expecting to be met with something or someone, and all I see is my Ouija board, laying right down beside the rug in the walkway of the living room, which is about 12 to 15 feet away from the closet by the bathroom. I remember picking up the board shortly after and putting it back in the closet. Overall, it was pretty scary and left me visibly shaken. After that experience, which I believe was in 2015 or 2016, I learned how to properly use a Ouija board. When I was about 11 or 12, my 2 friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister, Dee, of one of the friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently, ending a Ouija conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Eri was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, and if they wanted to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out
A-N-D-R-E-E.
Okay, cool, my middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eri was messing with me.
Y-O-U-M-U-S-T-R-U-N.
Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously we're pretty much done with talking to spirits and say goodbye. We decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring. So we did. Eri's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard, and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly, we both get a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, but he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back over, and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eri and I had a grip on either of his arms, when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed and just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Eri and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what had happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis and waist. I had slept alone. Eri couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed, not my choice. And I never scratched myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day.
Please note before listening to this, we were completely irresponsible, and we know this. Back when I was in high school, 2 friends of mine, Olivia and Megan, decided we wanted to use a Ouija board. I was nervous to do it the first night, so it was just Olivia and Megan. It works, so I started doing the board with them. We do this almost every single night, trying to talk to the same 2 entities we thought we were talking to. We'll call them Blue and Red. These 2 entities became attached to us. We know for sure there were 2 because of the physical energy you could sense from both. One was a very strong, intense energy that caused chest pressure and ringing ears. They'd appear shorter and move the planchette quickly. The other was weaker, causing only pressure and no ringing in our ears. They appeared much taller and moved the planchette slower. It was always the same physical appearance and physical energies. I have a tiny story for Blue and Red. However, I've decided not to share, as their deaths are a sensitive topic that could easily trigger someone listening. It started out like the typical Ouija board experience. Electronics turning off on their own, hearing footsteps, feeling like we were being watched, tapping and banging, things moving on their own. We even had objects disappear and reappear in other places. I also have a few razors that were completely dulled to the point where the sharp parts are completely gone. They're just pieces of metal at this point, not razors. It was something that never bothered us because we didn't scare easily. Then it escalated. They became more physical. They'd appear to us. We'd hear them talking through phone calls. You could hear them moving around through the phone and even interacting through dreams. I've had dreams of drinking and talking with them, telling them about my dog who'd recently passed, venting about BS, and then the one I remember most, being put in their positions before death. Olivia and Megan had the same dreams. It escalated again when Megan and an outside friend upset Olivia, Blue, Red, and myself. Megan began to experience some revenge from Blue and Red through the board and outside of the board. The things that happened outside the board include being hit with a car door, being pushed, and having her milkshake explode in her face. The board experience she and the outside friend had after upsetting everyone goes as follows, all in chronological order. Uncomfortable and inappropriate remarks, affecting the outside friend by bringing her to feel an overwhelming amount of anger where she threw the planchette across the room, saying really hateful things, and then having no memory of what she'd done. The board saying, "You're just like me." The outside friend says Blue's name, but the board spells out Red's name. Megan starts to feel an overwhelming amount of sadness. The board says, "You try to figure me out because you're scared," over and over again. By the time the sentence is finished, the outside friend is unknowingly saying, "I'm just like them," over and over again. The board says, "You're gonna break." The outside friend continues repeating that she's just like them, going in and out of awareness. I never heard about how they ended that session. We have since stopped doing the board, but they're both still here. I've seen them. Don't do Ouija boards, everyone.
About 15 years ago, my old high school group decided we were going to attempt to contact my friend Ben's biological dad that had recently died before he got to know him. Now, Ben was absolutely wild. He wasn't scared easily. My high school sweetheart was with us, and he was absolutely terrified. I owned a Native American necklace that had items placed in it for protection from spirits. To help ease his anxiety, I placed the necklace around his neck. We partook in the devil's lettuce and started our session, giggling. I was no believer in Ouija boards. It didn't bother me a bit that we decided to do this in an abandoned church deep in the woods either. Only my boyfriend was terrified, which caused our friends to tease him mercilessly. The board was set up and we got serious. We just had no idea how serious this was about to become. As the planchette moved to spell his father's name, I smiled, thinking this was his method of closure. He was clearly doing it because he had refused to share the name beforehand. But looking into his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen etched into his face. It was fear. I can't remember how it all went down, but suddenly, the board was spinning and had said murder. I was starting to feel cold even in the heat. That's when it all went to shit. The pews, already broken, were shaking uncontrollably, even toppling over. We were in a back room that was essentially empty, but we ripped open the door to discover the pews toppling over. It started a massive panic to get out of the building. As I was running, I realized my boyfriend was not with us in the woods. I turned back right as Ben and a few others pulled off in their cars. Once I re-entered the dilapidated church, my boyfriend was stuck, literally stuck to the floor screaming. The building was shaking. It was ice cold and it felt like a sock had been shoved into my mouth. I remember my best friend helping me carry him out of the building. Within an instant, he had his wits about him and refused to talk about what had happened. He looked like he'd just been through war. He opted to keep my protection necklace on, citing that the demon may follow one of us. We never really talked about what happened, and that was very strange for my very open friend group. We knew it wasn't an earthquake because we live just an hour below the Blue Ridge Mountains of Appalachia and never get quakes that could move furniture. And to be honest, I felt something dark around me until a cleansing 11 years later, after the scariest haunting I've ever experienced happened. I don't know what we released or even have any clue how that could have been a natural event. Something threw those church pews to pieces, and we never went back.
Twice in my life, I've used a Ouija board. The first time I did it, it didn't seem to work out all that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, but I had my doubts. The answers to the questions were sketchy at best, and not all of them made sense. The one thing that maybe might have proved it was real was that I remember for weeks after we did it, our cat at the time would just sit outside the doorway and stare right in the direction of where we had set it up. We all noted that it was kind of weird, as he'd never done that before, but he eventually stopped and we forgot about it and moved on. Perhaps we did make a connection and our setup was just wrong, or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remained largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time, though, was an entirely different outcome. A few years later, and I'd moved across the country to attend university. One day, me and some of my uni friends got on the topic of a Ouija, and we decided to have a crack at it one night. But this time, we'd do it properly. One of my friends was quite an esoteric sort of guy, and he did some research on how to properly do it. None of the others besides me had tried Ouija at this point, so we were mostly going in blind. But my friend made us a proper board setup, and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies, as he put it. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I will mention here that I was still very skeptical, so I went in with the mindset of carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass at all. But throughout the entire session, the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated. I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity interacting with us throughout this entire session, but that wasn't the only reason I started believing. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear and yet so bizarre that I'll remember it forever. One thing my esoteric friend said was paramount to the experience was courtesy. So we started off basically asking if there were any spirits available to speak to us. And when we got a yes, we introduced ourselves and asked if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a little bit. We apologized for intruding and made it clear that the spirit did not have to answer any questions it didn't want to. And then we began our questioning in earnest. The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier killed in 1984. He was from Yemen. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or wherever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, that there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell were untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible. After all of this, we then decided amongst ourselves to wrap things up, having already had our minds blown away by what we just experienced. We said thanks to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This was an important part, according to my friend, as it would allow the spirit to return to its own realm easily. And that was it. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment and yet also enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I had no reason to believe it was lying to us intentionally, then death was almost something to look forward to. I considered myself a pure atheist up until this point, but this one night rattled that belief so hard that I no longer consider myself as such, and we will always have the memory of my Yemen friend to prove otherwise. Thanks for listening, guys.
This happened in January 2020. I was 22 and my sister was 15. To make a very complicated long story short, we wanted to contact my ex-boyfriend. He had killed himself a few months prior in the house we shared, and I still lived there. We were always weary of Ouija boards, but we were desperate for answers. We turned off all the lights and lit candles, blessed the house and said the stuff. We were extremely careful to be respectful and follow all of the rules. We connected with a few different entities. The first one called itself Mama. We asked if it knew my boyfriend. It said yes, and that it could connect us. Something then said it was my boyfriend, and it said it loved us, and said XD, which we assumed was the XD laughing face he would use. Then it said that Mama was evil and bad. It asked us to come back tomorrow. We came back, and this time was way worse. It was Mama again. The planchette was going so fast, it was almost getting away from us. It seemed to really like my sister. It kept jumping off of the board towards her. It zoomed from M to A over and over. It tried to say it was my boyfriend again at one point, but it couldn't answer any questions about him or us. I tried to ask what our anniversary was, and it just guessed. And when I said it was wrong, it's like it got mad and started zooming from 0 to 9 really fast, like it was doing for the M and the A. It said it was behind us, and my dogs started going nuts. We said we were going to go, and it kept saying no, like it was mad and we weren't allowed to go. But we eventually got it to say goodbye, and we have never used it again. In fact, I left it there when I moved. Neither of us would ever fake that kind of thing. I've read that it can be subconscious, but I don't know. That shit was wild. We felt so sick and off after. She had bruises the next morning. We don't like to talk about it. It almost feels like it was a dream, but it wasn't. And the weirdest part is that when I think about it, I almost want to go back and do it again. And I don't know why, because it was terrifying. This will probably be a very long story, but I'll never forget it as long as I live. I also didn't believe in anything paranormal or outside the realm of science until this happened. I still just don't know what to make of it, to be honest, and I would love to hear what people think might have been going on. So my freshman year of college, I moved into a dorm in a very old, historic building in Florida. It was 2020, and COVID was still really bad, so each student had their own room. I quickly made friends with the girl who lived directly next door, Jane, and a girl On the third floor, Stacy. Only on the first or second night, we got talking about ghosts and other spiritual stuff. As we all realized, we were very into the occult and whatnot. The third floor girl, Stacy, suggested that we make and play a Ouija board. I had tried one once before at sleepovers and it had never worked, but I was interested, and it was a super old building that was supposedly haunted, so we gave it a shot. We made the board out of cardboard, and that was the first of many nights of using this thing. It worked every single time without fail. No matter what combination of people had their hands on the planchette. We eventually got a store-bought board. No change occurred. We used this board probably every day. It became like an obsession. It's all we would talk about. I'm still not sure if it was because the thought of speaking to something otherworldly was exciting, or if something else was going on. I could tell so many little stories, but I'll try to sum up the important stuff. We knew it was legit the first night we played. We were quickly introduced to the entity on the other side. It went by shove most of the time, but occasionally by solo or SO. I don't think we spoke to anyone but them the entire time. We tested it by asking the name of the stepmom of another friend we'd recently made. It guessed correctly immediately, without her having her hands on the board. We had just met her, so there is no way we could have known this. On the second or third night, we asked Shove to give us a sign that they were really there. We heard a noise at the closed door to my room and looked over to see a shadow outside of it, as if someone was standing right outside the door. We opened it, and of course, no one was there. We closed it, and the shadow was gone. Little things happened over the course of the semester. Things would be moved that I couldn't explain. The sink in the bathroom down the hall would turn off and on by itself when nobody was around. Stuff like that. After a few weeks of this, things really started to get weird. One night I was playing the board with Stacy's boyfriend and Jane. Stacy was laying with her head on her boyfriend's lap, not touching the board. Suddenly, she started panicking and hyperventilating. We thought she must be having a random panic attack or something, but she claimed she was unable to control where her eyes were looking. We went to take her out of the building because she was so freaked out, and in the lobby she swore she saw someone out of the corner of her eye, then saw that no one was actually there and bolted out of the front doors, terrified. Shove really seemed to turn on Stacy for whatever reason. On another night, not long after that one, the three of us original girls were playing the board, and Stacy told us her back was really hurting. She asked us to look and see if she had a really bad sunburn on her lower back. Strange, but that's where she said she felt it. There were a ton of fresh scratches on her lower back when we looked. This was scary because she was not leaning on anything and had both hands on the board. Around the time of these events, Stacy started to act really strange. For the first months I knew her, she was always very calm and down to earth. She began acting extremely short-tempered and possessive and jealous. Now, this is where I'm not sure what to think. Was it a mental health crisis? Or were our nightly activities causing side effects? I'm not sure I'll ever know. But I remember Stacy screaming at me and stomping up the stairs to her room and being so shocked. It was so out of character. During a fight with her boyfriend, she ripped her hair out and slammed her head on the floor. And then after a week or so, she was involuntarily institutionalized after telling her therapist that she was going to take her life. This was obviously very upsetting for Jane and me. And then Jane had begun having suicidal thoughts. I'm not sure if this started before or after Stacy left. And then one morning I woke up and checked my phone, and Jane had gone to the hospital earlier that morning because she woke up and couldn't breathe. It ended up being some tonsil issue, I believe, but the timing was weird. Both Jane and Stacy ended up dropping out of college for mental health reasons. I spent the rest of the semester and the one after in that room and never had any serious issues. I had a roommate the second semester of that year and she didn't have any issues either. I played the board every once in a while to show curious friends the ghost that lived in my room. Shove was always there, but did nothing more than respond on the board. I'm still very much in touch with Jane and Stacy. Stacy completely returned to her old self not long after dropping out. Whether this was due to the removal of stressful college work or being away from that building for good. Was she possessed? Who was Shove? Was Shove even real? Or did we just make him up because we desperately wanted to believe something else was out there? I'll probably never get any answers, but I guess at least I have a good story to tell at parties. When I was growing up, my parents would occasionally tell me the story of the time they played the Ouija board. It was when they were dating before I was born, and they had a crazy night with it, where it answered all kinds of questions. There is one thing my parents are not: liars. So these stories only intrigued me to find out for myself. When I was 17, I was a senior in high school, and I had my first serious boyfriend. We were both very curious to know if the Ouija board truly worked, so we bought one. My bedroom was in the basement, and we set it up on my bed. It was close to midnight. We lit candles, turned the lights out, and sat cross-legged on the bed on each side of the board. We were supposed to pick a question and focus on it, with our index finger lightly touching the planchette. The question we decided to ask was, will anyone talk to us? We must have sat there focusing on that question for about 40 minutes, occasionally shaking our hands out from them getting tired of being held in that position. After about 40 minutes, the planchette started to vibrate underneath our fingers. Then, it slowly moved to the word, yes. We stopped for a moment and looked at each other, like, is this real? Then we asked, are you a spirit? And it moved away from the word yes and back to it. At this point, I noticed that I could feel a strange electricity moving throughout my body. I didn't like it. I've never felt it before or since. We decided to ask, are you nice? And it very quickly moved to the word no. Now I am riddled with terror. I exclaim that I cannot play anymore, and I go to pick the board up and put it back in the box. Except the board will not move. Not a sliver. It felt as though it was stuck there with cement. I remember yanking with my entire body at least 3 times before suddenly it felt as if something got off the board, and I flew backwards with it in my hands. I slammed it into the box and closed it. My boyfriend's face was pale. He tells me, I have to go home. And I'm like, oh my god, don't leave me here. But he leaves. Here's where it gets even more scary. After I walked my boyfriend to the door, I went back down to my room. Only, it didn't look like my room anymore. Don't get me wrong, nothing changed visually. It was still all my stuff. But I felt like I was in a parallel universe. I felt so far away from all that is comfort and good. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not a religious person at all, but I was so beside myself with terror that I didn't know what to do except grab the Bible. I slept with it in my arms with the lights on. I actually slept with the lights on for the next week. I did not tell my parents what I had done, because I didn't want to get in any trouble for playing the Ouija board in the house, or for my boyfriend staying over way later than he was allowed to. We played it when everyone went to bed. My room continued to not look or feel like mine for a couple of weeks. Also, when I would get up for school in the morning, I would have to walk through the dark basement living room to get to the stairs because there was no light switch by my bedroom door for the living room, and my bedroom door was in the back corner of it. So when I would first open my bedroom door, the light in my room would cast out into the living room darkness. And for a split second, I would see a black cat run from the patch of light into the dark. I would shake it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. But after a couple of weeks, I was eating breakfast upstairs with my family and my 7-year-old sister exclaims out loud, "I keep seeing a black cat in the basement." That confirmed that it was not a trick of my eyes. Also, about a month after playing the Ouija board, my dad says to me, "I don't know why, but the basement and the stairs have really bad vibes, and it's bothering me, because when I bought this house, one of the things I liked was that it had a good energy." That's when I realized for sure, without a doubt, all of this stuff was not in my head. I had haunted my parents' house by playing that game. I learned after the fact that I was supposed to say goodbye before stopping the game. I think that had something to do with it. Another strange thing that happened, I always slept with my bedroom door locked. A few weeks after playing the game, I woke up in the middle of the night to somebody jiggling my bedroom door handle violently. In the morning I asked who was messing with me, but everyone acted like I was weird for asking. About 6 months after playing it, my stepmom was cleaning the house. I found the Ouija board and threw it away. Things started to calm down a little bit after that, but it took years for that basement to feel okay again. And honestly, it never went back to feeling the way it did before I played. I finally owned up to my dad and stepmom about what I had done. I wasn't in huge trouble, but my dad was like, "I knew the house felt different, damn it." To this day, I feel bad for bringing that energy into the house. After that experience, I want absolutely nothing to do with Ouija boards. They're not allowed in my home, I learned.
A short time before the encounter with the shadow entity, my friends and I were playing at my house. There were about 4 of us. I don't exactly remember. I had a lot of friends in my neighborhood, about 3 years of my age. I was very young. We were bored and decided to play Monopoly or something. We had a closet full of board games. This was the late 70s, by the way. While digging through the games, we found an Ouija board. Not sure where it came from. It didn't just appear or anything like that. My father built the house and Parker Bros made them, and they could be purchased at most department stores. My older brother probably bought it, I don't know. I'd seen one on TV, so I kinda knew how to use it. My friends and I started asking questions, and the planchette started slowly moving. They were dumb kid questions, and I don't really remember them. Except for one. Convinced that one of my friends was moving the board, I decided to ask something to prove whether it was real or not. Everyone swore they weren't moving it. The questions were mostly yes or no things, and it moved with purpose. I didn't have a clue what my mother's age was, never had any reason to think about it, and didn't care. I'm sure my friends could have cared less about it too, so that's what I asked. The board started moving again, pointing to 2 numbers. My friends asked me, "Is it right?" I didn't know, and they were like, "Damn it, why'd you ask?" I just said I don't know. We said we were done, and it moved to buy. A little freaked and bored with it. We put it away. When Mom got home, I asked her, "Mom, how old are you?" She told me, and the board was right. This was an odd experience for a couple of reasons. I was so young, I didn't know or care. I'd never have a reason to wonder or care about this. My mother had me at a late age, so she was a good decade older than my friends' moms. I was a little freaked out about this, but I really just found it strange. And after that, the rest was history.
Today I wanted to share one of my experiences with the famous Ouija board with you. When you are interested in the occult and paranormal, then you will stumble someday over that thing. Over the years I have tried it a few times. Mostly nothing happened. But there were moments it actually worked. And there was one that was really special. I thought this experience might be interesting for some of you. But before I begin with the story, I wanted to mention that a Ouija board isn't a toy. Many people, also the people in the story, try it for fun. They think it is a game. But regardless of whether you believe in such stuff or not, never do a Ouija session unprepared. And again, if some of you don't believe me, that's absolutely fine. I'm not angry at you for that. It happened 6 years ago when I was 17. It was Halloween, and my girlfriend and I attended a Halloween party. We had a lot of fun there. As it became very late, a few people had the idea to try a Ouija session because someone brought a board to the party. I did a Ouija session with my aunt before, in which we tried to talk to a certain person, but sadly nothing happened, and I was a bit drunk, so I thought it would be fun. My aunt would have been absolutely angry with me because you always should do a Ouija session with a clear mind. It could be a bad idea when you are drunk or high, but being drunk wasn't our only mistake. Again, when you are doing a Ouija session, then always be prepared. Do it with a practiced person. Inform yourself. Buy frankincense and candles. Prepare questions and do it with respect. You don't know what you could bring into this world, and it could be dangerous. But let's get back to the main story. In the end, we were 6 people that wanted to try it. My girlfriend and me, 3 other ladies, and a guy that I will call Norman for this story. The Ouija board belonged to Norman, but he did not try it before. We went to a quiet room so the other guests couldn't disrupt us. So we were sitting in this room, which was only lighted by 2 phones, and we thought that it would be fun. I don't know how long we were sitting in this room and yelling the questions against the board. 2 of the 3 girls became bored and decided to go back to the party. That was also a big mistake. Never break the circle when you are doing Ouija. Well, in the end, there was just Norman, the other girl, my girlfriend and I, who tried to summon a ghost. We asked questions again and again, and then something happened. When Norman asked for the 100th time if someone was there, the planchette began to move slowly. We did it. Finally, we had contact to something. Norman then asked who the presence is that was with us in the room. We got a name, Luca. Norman was very happy that something was happening, and he went on talking to Luca. A few moments later, we found out that Luca was a little 8-year-old boy. At this point, I got a bad feeling. My grandpa was a demonologist and did research with paranormal and occult things like ghosts, demons, and other things to find out more about it. In his notes, he mentioned that evil entities like demons often like to disguise themselves as little children because they seem harmless, and so was Luca, harmless and friendly, like a little child. Norman had a lot of fun talking to the boy, but soon the other girl and my girlfriend also noticed that something was odd. The whole atmosphere in the room was just bad. Then, one of the phones broke. It belonged to my girlfriend and it was a new one, just a few weeks old. I said to Norman that it would be the best if we stopped this, but he didn't listen. After a while, we didn't get the right answers anymore. The planchette just moved to random numbers or letters that didn't make any sense. Also, a weird sweet smell came up into the room. It didn't smell good. It was disgusting sweet. I remembered what my aunt told me about Ouija sessions, and the answers you can get. When the answers to your questions don't make any sense, then you should stop immediately, because the thing you called is mocking you at this point. It would be stupid to go on. Finally, Norman also decided that we should just end this, because he was annoyed. But you can't just go and leave the board there. you have to ask the entity you are talking with if you can stop the session. But every time we asked, the planchette was moving to no, and something like that can be a huge problem. The thing was mocking us, and we became a bit afraid. Norman and the other girl wanted to go, but they could be persuaded to stay a little bit longer. Luca's game took longer than we would like. Every time he responded with just no or senseless number or letter combinations. But finally he responded with yes, and we could say goodbye. It was truly bizarre how the atmosphere changed after that. It wasn't threatening anymore, and also the disgusting sweet smell was gone. The girl left without a word to us, and Norman was very scared after the whole experience. Days after that, I saw Norman again. He didn't look very good, like he was sick. We talked a bit, and he told me that he got rid of the Ouija board. He said that he had terrible nightmares after that, and he always had the feeling that something was watching him. He is better now without the board. This was the only Ouija session I had where something like that happened. The other ones were very harmless, interesting but not that spectacular. And hopefully, Luca, the little boy, is back where he belongs. So this happened during the summer of 2010. I believe it was the summer between my junior and senior years of high school. At the time of writing this, it's been about 10 years. As most teenagers do in the summer, me and my friends hung out really late. Most of us were also kind of horror buffs, and used to mess around and try and find paranormal things around us. Ironically, we never really experienced anything at all strange, much to our dismay, until this night. It was sometime after midnight, on one of those nights where it doesn't really cool off that much, even after it gets dark. 5 of us were hanging out at the time. Everyone's names aren't necessary, except for one. We'll call him Charlie, for the sake of his privacy. We decided to head back to one of our houses to relax and hang out. This friend had said that ever since she was really young, she had experienced odd and creepy things in her house. After sitting around in her basement, attempting to cool off, someone suggested we mess around with a Ouija board. Admittedly, I kinda sighed at this. I always thought Ouija boards were stupid, but my friends wanted to do it, so I figured, why not? We did the whole setup, turning the lights off and putting a candle in the center of the circle we were sitting in. Setting the mood, you know. The basement wasn't entirely dark, as there was a small window close to us, and light from the street came in from outside. The first few minutes were pretty uneventful. The piece didn't really move at all, and we asked all the basic questions a few times. After about 10 minutes, we asked the question of, is there something there? And the piece started slowly moving. During this whole process, Charlie's girlfriend and myself were the ones holding the piece. I can firmly attest to this day that it didn't feel as though anyone was moving it. It's hard to describe, but it didn't feel like the way it would move if it was one of us sliding it. It slid over to yes. We continued on and asked it a few questions. We asked if it was the spirit of a person one of us knew. It once again slid the piece over to yes. At this point, things started to feel a little too real, and we all sort of looked at each other and asked if any of us were screwing around. Everyone denied, of course, and the tone of seriousness and hint of unease made me think that they were telling the truth. We asked several more questions, trying to narrow down who this spirit might be. Not all of them received quick answers or any movement at all. But when we came around to Charlie, he asked if it was a family member of his. After he asked that, it moved to yes, but a little faster than it did when it first started moving. If there's something you should know about Charlie, it's that he takes his bond with his family really seriously. He's always been super close to his parents, his siblings, and all his extended family. In all the years I've known him, I don't think I've heard him say a single unflattering thing about any of his family members. It's this fact that makes me think he wouldn't use something like a deceased family member as a tool for some joke or prank against us. Charlie's face got a bit pale after this, and the air in the room started to change. It almost started to feel like there was someone watching us, creating that sort of hair-raising unease. This may sound like a vague statement, but it's the best way I can think to describe the feeling. He then asked the spirit if they could spell their name. The piece started to move, a little quicker again, and spelled out a first name and half of a last name. After it stopped, we looked at Charlie to see his reaction. To our surprise, he had gone even paler, and tears had begun rolling down his face. I asked him if he knew the name, and he just responded with, "Yeah, that's my uncle. He died a little over a year ago." That was when it really hit us that this was more than we had bargained for. Charlie said he had been really close with his uncle before he died. We asked him if he felt okay with us continuing or if he wanted us to stop. He wiped the tears from his cheeks and said he was fine and wanted to keep going. Charlie's girlfriend asked, "Are you here to protect Charlie?" It moved to yes once again. We asked a couple more questions that we got mixed answers to. To be honest, after 10 years, I've forgotten some of what was asked. Before we ended it, Charlie had one last question. He just asked, "Will you sit next to me?" Now at this time, I had been sitting to the right of Charlie, with a bit of gap between us. After he asked that question, I felt a huge chill flit across me, and the area between the two of us was significantly colder than the rest of the room. Keep in mind, at this time it is around 3 AM on an extremely stale summer night, and we were in a basement that had no doors or windows open. This was, hands down, the most unsettling part of the whole occurrence. If I'm being totally honest, if I wasn't there myself and experienced it, I probably wouldn't have believed it if someone had told me. It was equal parts surprising and unnerving. After this, we wrapped things up, turned the lights on and composed ourselves. After hanging out another few minutes, we all went home for the night, shaken by what we had just experienced. To this day, the 5 of us have never actually talked about that night. It was one of those strange things where we just decided to bury it in our memories. If I'm being honest, I kind of wished we hadn't, because it was such a strange experience that I don't think any of us could probably explain to someone who wasn't in that room. Unfortunately, many of us have drifted apart since high school, and I still talk to them once in a blue moon, but not on any regular basis. And most of us don't live in the same town we did when this happened.
So I was around 15 at the time. I was super into demons and the occult as a teen. My siblings and I were staying at my Nana's house. It was the middle of summer, so we had spent the day in the creek. That night, we went to my uncle's house. He lived in an old farmhouse on her property. She had to work the next day, so we went there to be noisy kids. He was dating some woman who had 2 kids that were around the same age as my brother and sister. At some point in the night, we went to Walmart to buy a shitload of snacks and hit the $1 DVD bin for some classic horror movies. We were all on a high on sugar and 90 bagel bites, telling ghost stories. Our horror movies sucked. At some point, I bring up the fact I know how to make Ouija boards and use them to talk with spirits. My uncle, the 6'4", 250-pound bastard of a man, eggs us on. So I make an Ouija board out of a bagel bites box and magic markers. We use a shot glass from maybe Mississippi or Alabama on it. I just remember the Dixie flag on the side of it. Mistakes 1 and 2. We didn't have a candle, so we used a disco ball. You know, the ones that have a lot of colored dots and they spin around. Not the mirror ball type. Us girls started out circling the board with the glass, inviting something to join us. A few moments pass, long enough for all of us to get bored. Suddenly the glass jerks to hello, and our fingers all slip off. Everyone laughs and we were told to quit messing around. My uncle just kinda laughs and asks for a name. The glass spells out Ross. Full disclosure of all events are true, but I don't remember its real name. I'm just guessing for the sake of storytelling. But I remember it was short, only 4 or 5 letters, and a classic male name. My uncle fussed at us, telling to quit messing around that Ross was the name of the guy who built the farm. Ross would also happen to be a distant relative. We didn't know that. I mean, sure, we could have heard the name in passing. We put our fingers back on the glass. The girl is too scared to keep going, but my sister and I do. We put our hands back on the glass and circle the board. Our hands get cold to the point my joints start hurting. I also feel dread, and the temperature in the room is dropping, despite only using a small window AC, and it's the middle of a Kentucky summer. I ask if it's good or evil. It jerks to E before our fingers are forced off. Everyone is uneasy at this point. My uncle's girlfriend kinda starts to freak out and tells us to stop. I tell her we have to say goodbye. She ends up getting mad and goes to bed. So like any teens, we keep going. My sister and I pick up the shot glass, making circles in the opposite direction. We tell Ross we're done talking and thank him for his time. We all then do a small ritual claiming no evil and try to summon a new spirit. This time asking for a good spirit. After circling some time, we eventually get another hello. When we ask the spirit what its name is, it spells out Ross. We get a little angry and tell Ross to leave. I know my voice was shaking when I told him we were scared and he was unwelcome. The disco ball starts spinning like someone had their hand on the top. Only the bass is spinning slowly, winding the cord until it unplugged itself. We all just kinda watched, dumbfounded. My uncle immediately stands up and says it's time to go outside for a smoke break. There is a door in the living room that starts shaking like someone is pounding on it. That door is only accessible from the living room. A trailer was placed next to the house to give it extra rooms and a bathroom. So the door's blocked off on the side, whatever's trying to come through. We scramble out. My uncle first, and me last. On my way out, something grabbed my ponytail. My sister said something pulled it straight up. While outside, we tried to burn the board. This was just cardboard that frozen food comes in and Sharpie marker. My uncle is actively trying, but it won't light or stay lit. He decides to douse it in gas and toss it in the burn barrel. It takes an uncomfortable amount of time to burn. I remember watching it after the initial whoosh from the gas. Goodbye was the last corner to burn. My nana had a couple of farm dogs. They were friendly enough to us, but were aggressive and hated strangers. These dogs were losing their minds, barking at the house. After that, we were all a bit scared. Us kids go to my nana's house. Us girls sleep in the bed and all the boys slept on the air mattresses on the floor. The girl ended up wetting the bed. At breakfast, we all talked about having nightmares. They were different, but we all agreed our dreams had fire. Mine was being in a burning bed that I couldn't escape. My nana freaked out when she heard what we did. She called her priest and had holy water and oils within an hour. She took us to the creek and did a mock baptism with the oils and water while chewing us out. Then she took crosses to my uncle's house, putting them on both doors and his bedroom door. We went back to my nana's a lot. We'd see my uncle every time too, since he lived 300 feet from my nana. His house always felt cold and unwelcoming. Maybe 4 to 6 months pass. My nana's getting ready to feed all our animals and notices my uncle's house is on fire. Luckily, he survived. His bedroom was the last to catch. The fire department took a long time to get there and the house was lost. I think they said it was a cigarette he dropped that started it all in the living room. And that's it for the encounter.
A little backstory. My family is different. We were raised Christian, but a lot of the family did witchcraft. Not your typical witchcraft. Most of us either followed into or put that aside. I believe in things that most don't, but I don't practice anything. My brother, on the other hand, went into it hard body. With that being said, onto the story. So I must have been around 23 or 24. I was living with my brother and grandma. My brother at the time would leave the house and not come back for days. He had a massive DVD collection, so when I was bored, I would either pick the lock on his door, or, if the key was available, I would use that. On this day, the key was there. So I went in and grabbed a bunch of DVDs and locked the door because I didn't want him knowing I was in there. I watched 2 movies, smoked some weed, and then got paranoid. So I go to place the movies back in his room. I closed the door and locked it. When I locked the door, I heard a sound, so I unlocked the door, and the door slammed into the closet doors. The way his room was set up, the door opens to the left. On the right of the doors was his double-door closet. So if the closet doors are open, he can't get out of the room. Being blazed, I thought maybe something fell in his closet. So I pushed one closet door closed and made my way in. I look around and realized there was nothing. So I was like, whatever, and closed the closet, exited the room and locked the door. As I locked the door, I heard the same noise. Thinking I'm just being paranoid, I unlocked the door and once again the closet doors were open. I push one door closed and make my way in. I look around, but only this time I felt the coldest shiver ever in my life. This kind of creeped me out, so I exited the room, locked the door, and that's when I hear the closet doors slam against the door again. Not gonna lie, it made me jump. I immediately run to my grandma and ask if he was there. She replies no, and I asked, "Are you sure?" And she said yes. So now I'm like, this guy is playing with my emotions. I unlock the door, close the closet door, go in. I'm like, stop playing with me, I know you're in here. Nothing. I start looking around. I look under the bed. Nothing. I look behind the bed. Nothing. Behind the curtains. Nothing. I'm guessing this guy is in the closet. I open the closet door. Nothing. I move the clothes around. Still nothing. I am now convinced I'm lit and it's just my imagination. I repeat the process. This time, I didn't lock the door. I run to my grandma and make her get out of bed and take her to his room. I tell her to listen. I lock the door and the closet doors fly open, slamming against the room door. She says, "What was that?" I tell her and explain what was happening. She says, "Well, he's in there." I push the closet doors closed, take her in, show her the room. She's like, something must have put pressure on the door. We exit the room, I lock it, and it happens again. I say to her, "See?" She turns, slaps me in the face and says, "Keep that kind of shit to yourself," and walks away. I push the closet door closed, go in. I'm like, whatever you are, you're not welcome here. I exit the room again and lock it. This time I hear one closet door open. Curious, I open the door. The closet door furthest from the room door was open. I close it and that's when his lights turn off. Mind you, this whole time the lights were on. That scared the bejesus out of me. I turn them on, exit, and lock the door. I hear it again. My dumb lit ass goes to look. Closet doors are open, lights off. I push in, close the closet doors and look in. The room was a lot darker, almost like you couldn't see anything even with the light coming from the hall. I turn a light on and run out, scared shitless. I leave the door unlocked. Around 11 p.m. my brother comes home. I rush to him and I say, "You want to see something creepy?" He looks at me with his pale face and says no. But I was like, well, you're gonna anyways, and I take him to his room. And he asks me why the key is in the lock. I come clean and tell him the truth. I tell him to lock the door. He looks at me and says, "I don't want to." I squint my eyes, now knowing he knows something. He makes a big fuss but locks the door. We both hear that shit, and he starts spilling the beans. He tells me some voodoo guy he knows gave him an original Ouija board. He continues that since he got it, he was having nightmares and hearing things. So he left the house for days. So I say, "You leave here and don't say anything?" And then he tells me, "I thought it was all in my head." He takes it and I thought he left with it. Instead, this guy puts it in another closet that has a skeleton key lock. Doesn't say anything. Leaves the house for another 5 days. He comes home, spends like 3 days in the house. For those 3 days, everyone is hearing the doorknob jiggling, but we don't know where it's coming from. I ask him, "You got rid of the Ouija board, right?" He turns, super slow, and says with this stupid look, "No, I put it in the small closet." When he says that, we hear the doorknob jiggle harder. So we go to the closet and you can see the doorknob moving. The thing with that closet is that there is no inside doorknob. I tell him to go in there and get rid of it. He says he's scared. What if it tries to eat me or take my soul? I tell him, well, that's your fate. It is what it is. He takes it back to the old voodoo guy. That's when the old voodoo guy tells him that he found that Ouija board in the Amityville house in the late 70s, early 80s. After that day, my brother stopped doing his weird stuff and started going to church. Till this day, every time I talk about it, I feel cold shivers and get goosebumps. This story took place at my childhood home in Minnesota. I live in Oklahoma now. My sister and I were home alone and bored, so we decided to play some creepy games. Like the playing card game, which is probably the least deadly game to play in my opinion. Since that didn't pan out any interesting results, my sister and I decided that we wanted to play the Ouija board instead. The only problem with that being that we didn't have one, so we'd have to make one. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a piece of paper and a picture reference, and later we had our board. My sister, Kay, shut all the curtains and blinds in the living room and kitchen since that's where we were playing, while I collected a few candles to light. Once we were settled, I decided that I wanted to record our game with my phone and asked her to wait. Though, fair warning, I do have an Android, so the footage was dark and grainy. I was lamenting my woes when it happened. As I fiddled with my phone to try and get it to brighten, I turned it towards the window, staring at my surroundings through the screen. Then I shifted on the love seat in order to direct the camera down the hall leading to the front door. Now, on the corner right next to the living room was the door to the laundry room. This door was shut, and that is important information because with the way this thing appeared, it wouldn't have been possible for a human to do. When I panned the camera over, it only took a few seconds before a humanoid head popped out from behind the wall, long dark hair shifting with the movement. I immediately stopped the film and tossed my phone onto the cushion next to me as I began to open curtains, not daring to move over to the light switch, which was right where that thing had appeared. Kay asked what was wrong, and, not wanting to scare her, I waited until we were out of the house before telling her, then letting her watch the video. The scariest part of the interaction was that, outside of the screen of my cell phone, there was nothing there. I'm just thankful that we never actually started playing the game. I can't imagine I would have liked anything it had to say. I actually kept the video and uploaded it to YouTube, so I caught whatever visited us on camera. I honestly probably wouldn't have believed it myself otherwise. A link to the YouTube video is in the description. When I was 17, my friend, George, was attacked by something supernatural right in front of me. My friends and I were very intrigued by Ouija boards towards the end of high school. We spent several nights, over a few months, cramming together and hovering over a planchette. We had a variety of experiences using the Ouija board, most of which you could describe as mildly supernatural or just plain old coincidence. One of the places we would frequent was the garage in George's family home. Like most garages, it was dark, damp and cluttered. George was as intrigued by the Ouija board as we all were. That is, until it started to target George. Over the course of different sittings, we would ask it all kinds of questions like who it was, what it wanted, how many fingers are behind my back. We still weren't convinced it was legit. We had the spirit tell us who they were, and when prompted for what they needed, they replied,
Kill George.
Needless to say, George was spooked, but in order to save face, he persevered. A sitting following that, we'd asked the same questions. As the conversation developed, a now different spirit had changed its mind and decided that it was the previous spirit and that it still wanted to kill George. This, paired with several events that George had experienced himself in the nights that followed, had driven George away from our little seances. We, however, were still more than happy to tinker around. We were not satisfied yet. On the last night we played with the Ouija board, we set up in George's garage as we usually did. He said that he had no problem with us using it in his garage and in his presence. He just did not want to participate. That night, it was just George, 2 girls and I. We turned out the lights and set up the board. We even lit a candle or two, for good effect. George and one girl sat across from the other girl and I. We were all in coats because it was winter and the garage was poorly insulated. The 3 of us, with our hands on the planchette, had barely even begun when George's coat arm caught on fire. I remember watching him fling his arm around as he tried to smother the flame. I immediately jumped up and turned on the lights. It didn't take long for George to put out the flame. We quickly piled out of the garage into his basement, and after a few moments of panic and confusion, we diverted our attention towards George. He took off his coat and swore his arm was fine. There wasn't a single mark on his skin. We then diverted our attention to the newly charred coat arm. The burn was about the radius of a fist, and it burned deeply through the layers, just shy of the inner layer of cloth. The most startling part was that it was undeniably the shape of a goat's hoof. We hid the coat away for several days. Once we gained the courage, George and I pulled it back out in an attempt to debunk our little experience. After all, there were open flames in the room, and he had a cigarette in his hand. We applied a cigarette directly onto the opposite coat arm several times. We took a lighter to it in another attempt to simulate the same kind of flame. No matter what we tried, we couldn't come close to recreating the hoof-like burn. Over time, I thought that maybe George had decided to stage the whole thing in an effort to deter us from the Ouija board. He certainly had motive. That was 10 years ago. George and I are still great friends. Occasionally, I get confident that I can get him to fess up and press him on the subject. It's been 10 years, and he still has the same response, that he loved that coat and was just as surprised and terrified as we all were. Personally, I don't believe he staged it. I believe that what we experienced was authentic, and my perspective on life has never been the same since. I never believed in Ouija boards until I was in college. My freshman year, my roommate bought one, and we all decided to play with it as a hoax. We planned this whole thing out, and we scared him real bad. Next time we used it, we decided to actually try it and see if it would work. And it did. Too well. We lived in West Philly, next to a cemetery, and on land that used to be a mental asylum for indentured servants and slaves, as well as a farm where a lot of slaves died before abolition. Not to mention all the people who died to violence in West Philly over the years. We got a lot of interesting people at first. A doctor who died from typhoid fever, a slave who was whipped to death, a young man who was shot in the 80s. We were even able to find some of their graves in the cemetery exactly where they told us they'd be. It was like uncovering a key to the past, but then things started to get really bad. We got a child who refused to give us their name or tell us anything about their past. Instead, it kept asking us questions, and when we didn't answer, it would start to spell the answers out for us. Things that none of us would know about each other, or that we never talked about. Stuff like childhood nicknames in foreign languages, and embarrassing moments. We would play for hours, so it had a lot of time to spell out whole paragraphs. And then, it uncovered one of our friends' secrets. They weren't even playing at the time. Some childhood trauma she hadn't told anyone about. She started sobbing and immediately stormed out. We tried to say goodbye to the spirit, but it wouldn't let us. It was vehemently pushing the eye away from the goodbye. We finally hung up, for lack of a better word, and checked on our friend, who then told us the story. We were all dumbfounded. She never played again, but we were hooked. Unfortunately for us, every time we used it after that, we would get the same spirit. Eventually, we uncovered his name, Ubel, and he told us that he wasn't technically a real kid. He died during the pregnancy and killed his mother along with him. She never named him, so he picked his own name. He said we were his first and only friends, and that he loved us and would find a way to be with us. We immediately were freaked out and put the board away for good, since we were convinced Ubel was a demon. Only it wasn't for good. The board would magically appear around our dorm. It would be open and have the eye set to yes. We would hear strange noises at night, footsteps, croaking, rattling. Whenever we talked about anything in the room with the Ouija board, strange things would happen. My roommate had set up these glow-in-the-dark decals in his room. Our other friend said she liked them and that she wanted some. The same one who vowed to never play after it uncovered her secret. That night she went to bed, and when she turned off the light, her ceiling was covered with glowing symbols. She called us over and we all saw it, but when we tried to take photos of it, it wouldn't show up on our camera. After we turned the lights back on, they disappeared and never came back. We had enough, so we decided to play one last time and tell him to stop and leave us alone. He got angry and started saying a string of random numbers and letters. We googled them, convinced it meant something, and the only thing that came up was a radio station. We tuned in on our phone, and it was a religious radio channel, and the host said all the sinners who were listening would face eternal damnation. We were terrified, and then the eye rapidly started spelling out,
See you soon. 3, 2, 1, goodbye.
and as it did that, my friend's stuffed rabbit croaked as if it were a dead creature and flew off the shelf. We ripped him open to see if there was a voice box inside or something to explain it, and there was nothing. We threw the board into the closet and never touched it again for the next 2 years. 2 years later, I came across it again, realizing it must have accidentally ended up in my stuff after we moved out. and I decided to play with it to see what would happen this time, thinking that the last time it was all an elaborate hoax my roommate had cooked up to get back at us for scaring him the first time. This time, it was me and a whole new group of friends. As soon as we ask the first question, it starts spelling out Y, U, B. I never let it finish. I immediately moved it to goodbye and told my friends we were done. I've tried the board several times since then, and every time I get U-Bell. No matter who I'm with, people who have never even heard the original story. I'm done with these for life. Ever since playing with it the first time, I've attracted spirits like wildfire. I hesitate in telling this story because I don't want to contribute to the Ouija board stigma. It is in fact a board with letters painted, stamped or stenciled on it, or the way Hasbro makes them, a sticker on pasteboard. It is not a portal or a gateway, and nothing lives inside them. It would be rather tight. Energy feeds off energy, and the board being an inanimate object can't emit its own energy. That comes from those who use the board. I was given my first Ouija board by my grandmother, I think for my 14th birthday. She liked to give odd things for birthdays for some reason. A group of the neighborhood kids were bored and hanging out in my room. We didn't know what we wanted to do, so we just hung out, chatting about whatever kids chat about. There was one girl being snoopy and looking in my closet, and she spotted the board. She came out all excited and asked if we could try it, and I said, yeah, whatever. So two of them sat facing each other with their fingers on the planchette and started asking questions. Silly questions like, does so-and-so like me? Or, does he have a girlfriend? Well, that didn't end well when the thing pointed to no, backed up a bit and pointed to no a second time. She got upset and decided she didn't want to play anymore. Then it was my turn with someone else. I forget what she asked, but the planchette didn't move, and she became frustrated, so she got up and someone else sat down. This is where things became weird. She asked if she could speak to her grandmother, who had recently passed because she missed her, and it pointed to yes. So the thing starts doing a figure 8. Slow at first, and then gaining momentum. Then it stopped. This girl started to ask if her grandmother was present. It said no, and she just had to ask who we were talking to. Well, that did it. It spelled out devil. A rocking chair across the room started rocking all by itself, real fast. There were screams and a stampede out of my room and out of the house. Luckily, no parent was home at the time. They didn't tell their parents right away, but later that night, they all had nightmares. And they had to tell their parents. Their mothers called my mother, all upset. Apparently, the fathers thought it was funny, but the mothers didn't, and I got in trouble. Even though I wasn't the one who pulled the board out of the closet, and said so, but that didn't matter. Grounded. The nightmares weren't all they suffered. Of course, looking back, I think that group exaggerated just a wee bit. They heard things and felt things that scared them so much, they slept in their parents' room at night for a week. I think that pissed the mothers off more than what happened. They were told to stay away from me. Thinking back, we kids were taken advantage of by a prankster spirit who knew exactly what to say to scare kids, and it worked. Other than being grounded and my rocking chair rocking by itself, nothing happened to me. I didn't have any nightmares, see or feel anything. The only nightmare was my mother. Some believe the idiometer is what causes the planchette to move. I think we, being hormonal teens at the time, worked a psychic connection or linked together, causing the chair to rock. Or it really was a trickster. This happened around 2 years ago, so if the details seem scrambled, that's probably why. My friend and I, who I will refer to as Q, were bored on a Thursday afternoon in January 2019. Naturally, as teenagers do, we decided to create a Ouija board to see if the whole hype around them was true. We assembled the board on a piece of cardboard we found in Q's recycling bin and followed a WikiHow tutorial on how to make a Ouija board. With everything set up, we began the process. We asked the standard questions that everyone asks, i.e., is anyone there, etc. We weren't having much luck, and just as soon as we were about to throw the board away, we finally got a response to our previous question. The planchette, we used a magnifying glass, slowly slid over to yes. I called Q out on his bullshit, but he swears to this day he didn't move the planchette. We kept asking questions, but we were getting very cryptic responses, mostly scrambled letters and such. Also, the planchette was moving very slowly at this time, taking around 5 seconds to transfer between letters and numbers. This all changed when we asked, "Where did you die?" The planchette quickly started rotating between the letters.
XZ, 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 XZ.
Q looked at me, with his face white as a sheet. I asked a question, "How did you die?" And it quickly moved over to a sequence of numbers.
10808080808008.
Starting to get spooked, we closed the session and burned the board. Nothing bad or paranormal has happened to us since that day. I tried to research the numbers and letters a few days after the session, but nothing showed up. This experience always nags my mind every once in a while, and now I've finally decided to hopefully get some answers. Does anyone have any idea what these numbers and letters mean? Okay, I haven't told this story, not even to my mum. This will be long, so I apologize in advance. This happened a long time ago. So my cousins, Kirite, male 14, Gero, male 16, Boni, male 15, Chui, male 14, and myself, female 14, found the board inside a box in my late great-uncle's house. It was also my cousin Gero's idea to play it. It did take some coaxing, but he convinced all of us to go to an empty field close to my nana's house and try and play with it. We had always been warned to never play with anything like this, but we were kids, and well, we liked to seek the thrill of not listening to the adults. Anyway, we did the ritual, or at least what we thought we had to do. We didn't have the internet to look this up, but we had heard from word of mouth from friends what we thought we needed to do, which was place a finger on the tab and move it around as we asked the board a question, and then stop moving when we finished asking the question. Seemed innocent enough. We asked a silly question like what day it was, and we got nothing. The tab didn't move at all. Then Bonnie asked, "When will I die?" And the tab began to move. We all laughed, thinking either Bonnie or Chui was moving it. But as it moved across the board, we all felt like an electric shock on our fingertips. It startled me and I moved my hand off because I felt scared. But quickly, Gero told me to put my hand back on, and he called out each letter as the board spelt it out,
Pronto.
which translates to soon. I remember the feeling around us went from nothing to frightening. I had the urge to back off and run away, but Gero, who could see I was very uncomfortable, reassured me that we were okay, that it was just letting the nervousness get to us. Now, because Bonnie had asked something that made the tab move, we told him to ask another question. He looked scared, but he finally asked if he was going to be killed. and right away the tab moved to the word yes. I'm not gonna lie, when this happened, he took his hand off the board. I remember all of us just looked at him, and Gero tried to calm him. At this point, Gero said that it could be anyone moving the tab, but deep down, that was the excuse to keep the little piece we were holding on to. Because even as Chewy, Kelite, and I still had our finger in the tab, we felt something when the tab moved. Bonnie said he was scared and didn't want to continue, but Gero told him that we had to finish what we started. Bonnie insisted that we stop, and Gero, like the real smooth talker he is, convinced Bonnie to keep playing. This time, Kelite asked when would Bonnie be killed. Bonnie was pissed he asked that. Kelite was the jokester amongst us. I think he was trying to lighten the mood, but Bonnie was on edge at the revelation. Anyway, the board answered 10. Chewy then spoke up. He said, "Guys, I feel something holding me in place. I've been trying to lift my finger off since it moved this last time." That's when we all tried to get off the tab and couldn't. That's when Bonnie and Kelite panicked. They started to scream and Gero tried to keep us all calm. We were held in place by something, and it was horrifying. We couldn't move. It was like we froze in place. Gero, again, got my other two cousins to stop breathing hard and yelling. Chewy and I were crying. Gero said, "We just need to finish the game, guys. We need to stay level-headed." He spoke calmly, but he was scared like us. Then I asked how we were to finish when we didn't even know how we started. Gero said we would just ask if it was okay to leave. He took a deep breath and asked if we could leave. It answered,
No.
Bonnie was a little more calm, but he said maybe we need to ask one more thing before asking if it would release us. Gero agreed, and he asked who was with us. It spelled out,
Satanas.
which is Satan. When I tell you the fear I felt, is something I never ever want to feel again. Once we realized what it said, it went quiet. Mind you, it was broad daylight, but we couldn't hear the wind or anything. It was like time froze on us. And again, cue the waterworks from Chewy, Kirite, and I. We were scared shitless. My cousin Gero then asked Satan, "Can we leave?" And it said
No.
There was no calming us. Then Bonnie began to yell at Gero. He lost his composure and tried again to leave, but couldn't. It was like our legs stopped working for us. Gero took a deep breath and said maybe someone new needs to ask if we can leave. And so Kelite asked, and the board went crazy. The tab went from side to side, our fingertips still attached, and suddenly we were released. We got up and we ran as fast as we could, leaving the board behind. I was sobbing and ran to my nana's house. My cousin Kelite and Chewy ran home to their mothers to tell them what happened, while Gero and Bonnie ran to who knows where. I told my nana everything. She was upset, but she had my uncle drive us to where we had left the board, and it was gone. My nana got the boys around and they swore they didn't have it. After digging around in their rooms, the board never showed up. Then my nana called a priest. He blessed us and had a healer pray over charm bracelets for our protection. And we didn't speak of this again. My cousins and I went different paths in life. Kerite became a politician, Gero a lawyer, Chewy an owner of a cab licensing place, and Bonnie, well, he was a Class A criminal. Now I won't give a year or where it happened, but Bonnie was murdered when he was 25 years old. He was one of 8 other victims of a supposed serial killer. He was shot twice in the face while he slept. His death was what reunited my cousins and I, and it left us completely mind-blown. The board had told us Boni would be killed, and when Kelite asked the when, it responded with just 10. I still think of this fateful day. Maybe life would have been different if we hadn't played with the board. Maybe Boni wouldn't have lived his life so recklessly, waiting for death at his door. I wish we could take it back, but maybe this was fate. I just want to make it clear that I am not an experienced writer. I've changed the names of the people involved to prevent any issues. There were issues in the past. I have been obsessed with horror and scary movies since I was 8 years old. When I was 13, I got heavily into creepypastas and just wanted to experience true horror for myself in real life. I am now 20 years old, and this incident occurred in the summer of 2018. I live in a small and boring town in northern Ontario. I had enough of watching videos and movies and decided to head to my local mall to pick up a Ouija board. It was springtime and the snow had just finished melting, and we were feeling adventurous. My friend Lenny and I split the costs of the board and then took it to his house. Later that night, we headed over to our local church and sat on the front steps and tried to contact some spirits. We moved the planchette in circles, called out, etc. Nothing. We tried the board for the next few weeks in various locations and settings. Nothing. I was beginning to feel defeated and sort of stupid for actually thinking a board could be used to contact the dead. Fast forward to the summer, and I had made a few new friends through Lenny and his girlfriend at the time, Sasha. One summer night we were discussing the Ouija board again, and I heard from Lenny and Sasha's sister that Sasha's house was haunted. I was skeptical at first, but Sasha went into detail on the experiences she has had in the house, and her sister, Tori, explained to me that this was all true. So I decided that if the board would work anywhere, it had to be here. Lenny and I asked the sisters if we could use the board at their house. They agreed, and Lenny and I were very excited to begin. We arrived at the house later that night, around 9 p.m, planning to play for only a couple of hours. Little did we know, this would last all night. The people present were Lenny and I, Sasha, Tori, and about 6 to 8 of Tori's friends who were younger than us by 2 to 3 years. We are all in the basement, and most, if not all of us, are gathered around the table. There are 4 or 5 of us with our hands on the planchette. We start calling out and just moving the planchette around, and we find someone. It claims to be a child who died in a fire inside the basement we were playing in. It told us its name and age, when it died, etc. I say it because we came to later find out that we truly didn't know what exactly we were all communicating with. A few minutes later, the board goes dead. Nothing. We all took a break and watched some videos on our phones on how to make the board more active. After discovering that we didn't have colored candles or a sacrificial lamb, just kidding, we decided to just continue as normal. My friend Lenny is very ballsy when it comes to this stuff, and he ended up calling out in the room to whatever was there. He was cursing and throwing insults towards the spirits and just overall being very disrespectful and cocky. The rest of the night, we all had random encounters with entities. The simple things like, I died here or there, I was this age or that age, etc. Until we contacted something strong. I say strong because the planchette would move with velocity and smoothness across the board. The air in the room thickened, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Around 10 minutes of talking to this entity, it still wouldn't tell us its name or place of origin. It mentioned that it wasn't born and that it wasn't from Earth. This is something I still think about today. Everything was going fine until Sasha screamed. She screamed with fear and pain in her voice, and her screams quickly turned into tears as she stood up from the table. Across her upper thigh were 3 distinct and somewhat symmetrical claw marks. One of Tori's friends mentioned something about the Holy Trinity and everyone started freaking out. Lenny and I were determined to proceed with the session because neither him nor I was satisfied in our pursuit of true fear. We got back onto the board with Tori and 2 of her friends. Shortly after this, I asked the entity to show me what hell was like. The board spelled out TORICLOSET. Tori Closet. We all looked at each other, and Tori blurted out, "My closet." I stared back at everyone in silence until Lenny spoke up, saying, "Go into her closet. You're the one who asked. Now go see." At this point, I actually started to feel some real fear. Tori's closet was one of those shoe closets that you'd have to crawl into to go all the way in. I slowly creeped open her bedroom door with Lenny right behind me and looked back at the rest of the group as they stared in anticipation. Lenny shoved me into the dark room from behind and said, "I'll hold the door for you just in case." "Fine," I replied as I walked over to the closet. I got down on all fours and began to slowly crawl into the closet. That's when I heard a loud thump and felt a bump on the floor directly where one of my knees was. I stood up and ran as fast as I could to the door, and once I was back into the main basement room, everyone was staring at me. "What the hell was that?" asked Lenny. I was speechless, and while I was thinking of a response to Lenny's question, I realized something very disturbing. We are in a basement, so how did the floorboard bump up into my knee? What was the loud thumping noise? I headed back to the table and demanded answers to what had just happened. The board went dead again. No movement, no activity, nothing. I decided that we should all take another break so I could process what had just happened. This time Lenny and I went upstairs, and Tori, as well as a few of her friends, stayed in the basement playing with the board. 15 minutes later, we hear some commotion downstairs, and Lenny and I rush downstairs to see 2 of Tori's friends on the board. The board was spelling out M-A, 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 M-A over and over again. The whole group decided that we wanted to pursue this strange entity even further, instead of ending the session. This is where the night takes a turn for the worse. After 5-10 minutes of messing around and asking questions, we finally asked the question we never should have. "Can we see you?" The entity told us that it would show itself, but only on one condition: that the 2 girls who were originally playing after the break went into Sasha's room with the board in complete darkness. The girls agreed, surprisingly, and they went into the room and shut the door behind them. Lenny looked at me before moving over to the door and grabbing the handle and pulling the door so the girls could not get out. This was funny at first, but in the next 5 minutes, it was clear that something was deeply wrong. From outside the room, we could hear the girls telling the entity to show itself. Then, one of the girls cries out, "We can see it." 5 seconds after that, there is screaming and crying, and one of the girls calling out to the other one with concern and fear in her voice. Sasha yells at Lenny to open the door, and when he does, one of the girls rushes out. We all pile into the room and see the other girl lying on the bed. We shake her, and she wakes up looking very tired for some reason, like she was sleeping. 5 minutes after, I'm getting ready to drive Sasha and Lenny to his place for the night and head home. The girl from the room was complaining of a headache and was laying on the couch upstairs. On the way to Lenny's house, he asks me to stop at a store so he can get some snacks and drinks. I agree and I stop there along the way. Lenny walks into the store and Sasha stays in the back seat of the car. A moment after Lenny left, Sasha gets a phone call from her sister, Tori. Tori was screaming through the phone. She said that we all need to drive back to the house because movie shit is happening. I quickly pulled out of the parking space, barely looking both ways, and sped towards the house. Upon arriving there was no commotion. I was confused. Tori came and got us and guided us to the couch that the girl was laying down on when we left. Tori runs up to us and whispers, "Shh, be quiet." Lenny and I were confused and asked what was going on. She told us there was something wrong with her friend. I slowly approached her friend, who was laying on an L-shaped couch in the fetal position, with her back turned to all of us. Just as I am about to extend my arm to touch her back to see if she's awake, her whole body starts to contort and twist. She moans loudly, and the moan soon turns into growls as I jump back in shock. I saw enough movies to make the assumption that she was possessed. Her friends wanted to call an ambulance, and Lenny and I knew that parents and the police might get involved, and it was a bad idea. We had to do an exorcism. I raced to my house to grab a few things before doing anything else. My parents are Catholics, so we had a cross and a Bible and even a mason jar of holy water. When I got back to Sasha and Tori's house, I found the girl still on the couch and knew we had to move her into the basement. We all held out our arms and made a human bodyboard to carry her on. While we were near the top of the stairs to the basement, she started twisting and contorting again, and most of the other people got scared and dropped her. She was now on the ground near the wall and the oven in the kitchen, and began having what appeared to be a seizure. Keep in mind, she has no history of seizures or health problems. She eventually sat up from being sprawled on the floor, resting her back against the oven. She sat still for a few minutes, and we all just watched, scared to approach. She then began smashing the back of her head against the oven until she fell over on her side. After that, she went back to laying on the ground. Eventually, we get her into the basement and rested her down on the floor, on top of pillows and blankets to prevent her from hurting herself on the floor. The next part is going to sound stupid, but it's the only thing we thought would help. Lenny started reading from the Bible while I splashed holy water on her, and the rest of the group just recited her name and some other things. She tried to bite us and was screaming in tongues and growling. She even scratched at one of her friends' faces. This went on from 12 to 3:30 a.m. Eventually she stopped moving, stopped growling, stopped everything, and just fell into a deep sleep. I decided to stay at the house, as everyone else did, just to make sure things were okay. I woke up around 4:30 a.m. with tightness in my chest and a very, very uneasy feeling. I grabbed my keys and ran out to the car and sped home before falling asleep. When I woke up, I headed back to the house. Everything was normal and the girl didn't remember a thing. Nothing at all. She had no headache or memory, nothing. She was just sore. I forgot to mention that a few people filmed a good part of the incident. We agreed to never show the girl the videos. However, someone sent it to a page on Instagram, and it ended up surpassing 100k views in a short amount of time. These are the issues I was talking about at the beginning of this post. She found it and lost her shit, and the video had to be removed. To this day, I haven't talked to her, but I hear she is doing fine. I still don't know much about MAMA. Its origin and agenda still remain a mystery to me. Part of me wants to know more, and another part of me wants nothing to do with it. In high school, a group of friends and I purchased a Ouija board to play with. We decided my house was the best, so the 5 of us sat around the board in my bedroom on Friday night and began to play. The board we got also was glow in the dark, adding to the spookiness. The first time was uneventful. The only entity we contacted, saying its name was No One. The second time playing was much more memorable and terrifying. It was only my close friend and I in my room, playing in the dark. Music playing softly on my stereo. We asked the basic questions and soon noticed our breath was visible. We were freezing. Now, my house was in the woods and my room was notoriously cold during the winter, so I turned on my space heater and we continued. No one appeared again, and still our breath hung in the air despite the heater going full blast. The radio began to jump stations and the volume raised and lowered. Loud static filled the room, so I shut it off. The stereo jumped back on, lights flashing, country music blaring, even though we hadn't been listening to country. Unnerved but also excited, my friend and I laughed, asking No One more questions. Feverishly, the planchette flew across the board, sometimes right out of our hands. Besides predicting some minor events, we laughed off the encounter, and the Ouija board was put in my closet for safekeeping. The novelty had worn off, or at least no one wanted to play the board anymore. Some had bad dreams or just bad feelings. Meanwhile, I felt a dark presence following me, almost like an eerie shadow I could feel but not see. One night while in bed, the doors of my closet burst open, the radio blared on, and my lights flickered. This happened a few more times on various nights before my paranoia got the better of me, and I began to look up how to dispose of a Ouija board. Obviously, we had released something sinister. I learned burning it was a bad idea, so my next option was burial, deep in my parents' woods. So one rainy afternoon when nobody was at home, I took the board and a shovel and hiked deep into the forest behind my house. I dug a hole the best I could and buried the board deep in the mud. I had terrible nightmares for weeks, that I would come home from school to find the muddy board on my bed, but no such thing happened. My closet would still burst open, and the radio turn on randomly, and my room stayed freezing cold most of the year. For years I felt haunted and followed by something dark. It has subsided over the years, but I still have encounters. TVs turn on or my things go missing then suddenly appear. The encounters feel much less sinister than before, so I think whatever or whoever No One was, it wasn't good. I think the board opened me up to the encounters, but only the first felt dark, or dare I say, evil. I have found as long as I tell them I know they're there, the events stop. I'm not sure what I encountered or even if it still follows me now. It was 2008, and I was a freshman in college. My BFF, let's call her Kay, is 1 year younger than me and was still in high school. Most of Kay's friends are in my grade, so when we all graduated, she was left behind to finish high school, pretty much as a loner. One day I got a random message from Kay that said, "Hey, how's your mum?" I thought this was an odd question considering my mum was a homeless drug addict, and I wasn't exactly in touch with her, and Kay knew this. I asked why she was asking, and she proceeded to tell me that because she was so lonely and bored, she started playing with a Ouija board. First with a friend, then by herself. The ghost she was talking to claimed to be a teen boy named Caleb. Anyway, she was playing with the board, as usual, when suddenly it spelled out my entire name. Then, my mum's entire name. I didn't even know my mum's middle name, but Kay did. Then the board spelled D-R-U-G-S, drugs. Kay asked the board if my mum was okay, and the board started going crazy, spelling out M-A-M-A, M-A-M-A. And she got really freaked out and stopped playing, then messaged me. I immediately called my mum's dad, who was a reverend and retired pastor, and he prayed over the situation, which made me feel better. Kay started playing the Ouija board, and shortly after, a lot of negative things started happening to her. There was a bad car accident in front of the house she had the board at. She was driving, and our friend was airlifted, but survived. Kay failed a few classes and didn't get into college. Then she started drinking heavily and became homeless for a few years. She would see images of the devil everywhere, the corner of the room, in dreams, and even in cartoons. She was in a dark place for a while, but things are finally going better for her. I didn't talk to my mum for 10 years. Then a few years ago we reconnected and she told me about all the times she would try to get better, try and come visit, but something would always go wrong. She told me it felt like something evil had control over her life. She's doing better, and we talk now. There's a lot more to this story, but it's already too long. Thanks for listening. Okay, so about 10 years ago, I was an art major with a concentration in photography and would spend the entire weekend monitoring the photo darkroom, mixing chemicals for other kids, smoking weed, hanging out and working on my thesis. My college used to be some super rich dude's manor, had a castle on the grounds, and the majority of the original structures were used as the art buildings. Super old, super awkward staircases, weird sized rooms, but super cool atmosphere. So I'm sure there had to be some serious history going on at this property. I've always been interested in the paranormal, but never had a good grasp of how interesting and dangerous it could be. During the first week of my freshman year, my grandfather died. I had to go home before making any friends, so nobody knew anything about me. Once I got back, we tried out a Ouija board and almost instantaneously the planchette darted between P and A, P-A-P-A, P-A-P-A. I called my grandfather Papa. Not a soul knew this. This is what got me to wholeheartedly believe in Ouija boards, and the start of me having a pretty good intuition of when my grandfather was around me, and even when he was assisting me. So back to senior year, a few friends and I decided it would be a good idea to bring the Ouija board into the darkroom after all the students left. I was really the only one with experience, but I really didn't know shit. The second our hands touched the planchette, it was a garbled mess. I could tell there were many different entities fighting to converse. The girls who I was with there were immediately too scared to continue, and they just flipped the board without closing it out. And I didn't know enough to do it either. I had an overwhelming feeling that someone or something needed me to flip it back over. They wanted to come through. I told the girls that I would finish cleaning and then meet up with them at the bar in a bit. I was determined. I knew something was there, just didn't know what, and I really just wanted a sign. So with the lights on, I asked for a sign, asked them to move something, do anything. Nothing. I waited a little longer. Nothing. I was about to give up. Our darkroom had this U-shaped hallway to get in and out. There was a definitive barrier between the light from the classroom and the dark of the darkroom. So, my dumbass took a chair and placed it right where the dark met the light. I yelled out for one more sign. This is your last chance, I'm leaving. Boy, was I not prepared for what came next. There was a radiator in the classroom that extended into the darkroom. There was a tiny hole drilled through the wall that allowed the tiniest of light to leak into the dark room at the corner of the wall, directly in front of where I was sitting. I said one last time, "Okay, I'm leaving, this is it." And in that instance, a 10-foot black shadowy mass ran into the corner, completely blocked the small amount of light I could see, and ran right through me. I have never before and never since experienced that feeling when it passed through me. It was instant, full body chills. It was an overwhelmingly instantaneous fear that washed over me. I sprinted out of there without looking up. From that day forward, everything was weird. I felt my life force being taken from me. If anyone has seen Donnie Darko, it was kinda like when he could see his path, but that was my soul being taken away. I would be showering and go into trances and end up noticing I was washing myself differently, almost like a Native American in my grade school textbooks. It was all so bizarre. It's like I was losing myself to this dark entity. I tried to do another Ouija session afterwards. The spirit that came through was an Indian chief named Tanaka or Tatatanka. I don't know if this was real, or just my imagination trying to fill in the blanks or come up with something somewhat plausible to what I was experiencing. After a while, its power dissipated, and I started to feel normal again. But ever since then, I still feel as if it has bad intentions. Am I a vessel for a dark entity hell-bent on using me? Or am I just a nutjob trying to make excuses for some of the shittiest things I've done in life? I still see it lurking in the corner of my room. I was always such a pleasant, fun-loving person, but ever since then, I've had blackout rage that leads to me severely hurting my loved ones in one way or another. Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas on what happened that day? And what, if anything, could still be happening to this day? Should I seek help? If so, from who? Thanks. One Sunday, about last year, my friend Jake and I wanted to do something fun and interesting. So we thought about doing a Ouija board. I got a sturdy piece of cardboard and Jake put the Ouija letters on it. We both thought it would be super fun or something. We knew about the stories of how they stay in your home forever if you invite them. And so, we went to a park, away from our neighborhood, and set it up there. My friend told me that we had to allow the spirits to control us in order to have it work. That kinda scared me. First, we would ask, are there any spirits who would like to talk with us? We asked that 15 times. It started to seem hopeless. Let's just do it one more time, and then we should just go home, I said. We asked again, are there any spirits who would like to talk with us? And then Jake moved the circle thing onto yes. I thought he was just being dumb because he didn't want to go back home. I was convinced that he moved it. Dude, that's not funny at all. Stop moving it, I told him. He looked at me with a serious face and said, I didn't move it. I thought you did. That's when I started to feel spooked. But it wasn't enough to get me away from there. Okay then, I'll ask it something only I know, I said. I thought about my room. I had an old, steelback iPod Touch at the bottom of my desk drawer, and I knew Jake didn't know about it. So I asked, what is in the bottom desk drawer at my house? And we spun the circle around on the board. It started to spell out I-P-O. I took my hands away and yelled, Jake, did you go through my stuff? He just looked at me in disbelief. You are pranking me, aren't you? He asked. That's when I realized this whole thing was real. We are talking to a spirit? Jake realized. Then we asked a bunch of stupid questions. Stuff like, what am I thinking? It would tell us correctly every time. We asked its name and it said John. Then we asked, "Are you a peaceful spirit?" It said no. Then we asked, "Do you want to hurt us?" The circle slowly moved to yes. "Holy frick, man," Jake said. "I don't want to do this anymore." Jake stood up. I was glad he said that because I felt the same. We tossed the board into a gated area and ran back to my house. On the way, we passed a person walking their dog. The dog barked at us like crazy. I've never seen a dog barking so loudly. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that spirit. I thought it was in my room. I don't know if I thought about the spirit enough to make myself feel it in my home, or if it was actually there. It was only a hint of presence I could feel, so it was unclear. A week later I couldn't feel it anymore. And to this day, April 24th, 2021, I haven't felt it again. Don't mess with Ouija boards unless you want to screw up your life. We must have gotten lucky. When I was 10 or 11, my friend brought out a Ouija board at her house. I didn't want any part of it because I believed in demons, but my friend and sister thought it was funny and asked it how old I'd be when I'd die. It said 14. Then they asked how, and it said black car. About 3 years later, when I was 14, other friends, ones who hadn't heard about the board and didn't know that friend, started saying that they had dreams of me getting into car crashes or being hit while crossing the road. I immediately asked about the car each time, and they always said a black truck or a big black dark-colored car. Multiple friends said this, and when I told them about what the board said, they were freaked out. Some will think it was my sister playing an elaborate joke, but this was 3 years after the board, and she's not a prankster, and neither are my friends. At least one would have for sure spilled the beans because they are bad liars and bad secret keepers. Anyway, they had these dreams for months and would tell them to me at lunch. Then another friend, who was in a separate grade, meaning she didn't eat lunch with us and didn't know about the dreams or the board's prediction, was talking to us when she turned to me and said something like, "Hey OP, I had a weird dream that I was at a funeral. Your siblings and parents were there, and we were all there, but you weren't. I'm not 100% sure whose funeral it was, but I'm pretty sure it was yours." This happened a few weeks before my 15th birthday, so I was freaked. Not long after my friend's dreams, my mum got a black car, and it made me even more scared. A big black Mercedes. Granted, there are a lot of black Mercedes cars in my town, but it still made me nervous. The weeks leading up to my 15th birthday consisted of me being extra careful crossing the street, and always wearing my seatbelt. I was relieved when my birthday came and passed, but it still haunts me. Such a bizarre experience. Others have suggested that maybe the warning from the board and dreams actually saved my life. And maybe that's true. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sorts of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got the best of me, I asked him where he really got the $10 from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend. Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet. My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however. Something they would have definitely voiced distraught about if they'd noticed we'd taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He'd never met this girl and had never seen her around at school. but she decided to sit in the seat in front of him. After riding the bus for a little while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and other kids were giving him looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then, subsequently, got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly pulled out from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting, but in the handwriting of what I could only assume to be a young child. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the facts that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself though. Of course, me being me, was extremely intrigued by this, even if it seemed absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board and see if we can contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover over the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he told me it could be fun. Mind you, I was in the 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention, and we immediately thought it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name, Kate, after asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" And getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after being creeped out. We'd never said goodbye before ending though. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we got both our tablets, placed them in front of our TV and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone's here, move something in the room. Nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy. We decided to ask the same question, but this time we said we'll leave the room to give it time. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back upstairs, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Maybe a coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade though, things got weird. I'd started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I'd gotten so scared one night, I'd grabbed the Bible one of my religious friends had gifted me. I'm not religious, and would sleep with it. Eventually I told my mum that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So out of fear, I never told them I was hearing voices again. But I'd space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we'd no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night, or the feeling of someone pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. But I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a looming presence.
When I was in middle school, I went to a friend's birthday sleepover where we did the typical girl things, painted nails, did makeovers, and watched a movie. It was all normal until my friend suggested we make a Ouija board. We scribbled out yes, no, and goodbye, along with numbers and the alphabet. She told us all the rules, and we nodded in agreement that we would follow. I remember being scared, wanting to fit in, but also wondering if this was a good idea. I remember the first movement happened, and I looked across to the girl facing me, insisting she hadn't moved it. She had said it was not her that moved the clear pebble we were all using as a planchette. We asked dumb questions like who we each liked and if our crushes liked us, typical middle school girl things. I don't remember much of these sessions other than a particular name, Wanda, and that we had asked her if she was a demon, and she had told us she was not. After a while, this was no longer scary, and we began to enjoy it more and more. I remember feeling so excited, like I just wanted to keep playing, as if it were a video game. The next day, I told my dad about it. My family was pretty open-minded about those things, so he wasn't mad or ashamed. He just wanted to make sure we were all safe. Fast forward, and I was in the first year of college, and I was over at a friend's place for a birthday, and she had talked about how she found a Ouija board, and we should try it. I was a little hesitant as now I realised the true implications of them. We eventually started setting boundaries, but I was still hesitant to believe that the planchette was moving. My friend asked questions like, when's my birthday? And what's my name? I shifted to questions not about myself, tending to ask about the entity rather than me. My friend suddenly asked if the spirit knew my deceased grandfather's name, and it spelled out L-O-U-I-S. I was in shock because none of my friends had known that. I know that I had directed the planchette to the letters, so I was surprised to see that it was correct. Later on, another friend of mine had said that she felt something grab her foot from under the table. I was right next to her and I didn't feel anything at that point. I'm like, let's just say goodbye and call it a night. It was all just too weird. I've never had a truly bad experience, but it's still very creepy, to say the least.
I'll start off by saying I have had a ton of experiences with the paranormal. These are just some of them. So as a teen, I was gifted a Ouija board for Christmas and used it on several occasions. Sometimes I'd get something, but lots of the time it was nothing. So here are some of the tales. Me and my friend had heard of this notorious spot near where we lived, where people would drive out, lose service, and then their cars would shut off and not work again until they hit one of the other roads. We decided to go out there with my board and see if we could make any contact. Down this road there was a turn-off that was gated off, but there was no lock on the gate and it was wide open. So we drove down there, and it took us to a house foundation of a torn down stone house. My friend S, J, K and my boyfriend at the time D. Me and my friends J and K started with the Ouija, my boyfriend D and my friend S blazing in front while we girls were in the back of the truck. And we got contact right away. The entity we talked to seemed to be two children. The spelling was childlike and even playful. The talk seemed to be asking us about our clothes and stuff like that. Then it went silent, and these two twin entities were scared of another present entity, which was apparently their father, who, as ghosts go, was a right creep. The children kept on coming and going periodically, between when their father would leave. As we talked to them, they told us how he hurt Mummy, and when she was gone, he'd hurt them too. Now we didn't think much of this until we took a walk around the property and found a ditch full of household belongings. Kids' toys in duplicate, and kid-sized Led Zeppelin t-shirts side by side. This basically confirmed that this may be real. We had lost contact with all the entities at one point, and the father was pretty mad at us. I can't exactly remember why. We'd spent hours communicating with these entities in my friend's truck, and with that many people in a vehicle, the windows will fog up. This is when it starts getting really weird. On the inside of the fogged up window was one child-sized handprint. Just one. And it was skeletal. My friend Jay, who had small hands, measured her hand against it, and it was far too small. Also, the window was not fogging up in that spot again. Shortly after we spotted this handprint, bang! Something hit the roof of S's truck so hard, the roof bowed in and then back out. You have never seen 5 people clown car out of a truck so fast. We searched on top of the truck, in the box on the ground, nothing. We thought maybe a branch had broken off a tree we were under, or maybe a goose. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When we checked the roof, there were 2 handprints, adult-sized. We're a bit freaked out at this point, so we all get back into the truck and my friend S tries to start it. It won't start, and we couldn't get reception on any phone. I was in the back, looking out the window, and I had noticed this strange mist coming over the grass towards us. I've never seen fog or mist move like this. As it got closer, it formed into a column, and it turned into a shape of a tribesman. It was wearing a type of headdress with feathers, a necklace, what looked like pants, and moccasins, and it was bare-chested. It took about 4 steps, and it was steps because the grass moved and I could distinctly make out every detail, and then disintegrated back into the mist, floating across the ground. It travelled in front of my friend's truck and moved off down a path through the trees. My friend S had seen it too and tried to start his truck again. It started. We then tried to follow him. We got close to the direction it had moved and the truck turned off again. My friend was annoyed at his truck because this never happens. We decided it's time to go and had to wait for his truck to start again. The truck turned off 3 more times before we could leave this area, and once more when we were on the road out of there. My friend was truck savvy, and he could not figure out what was wrong with it. His truck never did this, ever, again.
People often wonder what would happen if they used a Ouija board. Some people do it for fun. Some people use it for spiritual communications. I can tell you now that if you have no experience in using a Ouija board, do not do it. This is the story about what happens when you use one for fun without knowing the consequences. So when I was about 12, it was Halloween night, and we had just had a Halloween party for family and friends. A few of my older sister's friends stayed the night, and we ended up just hanging out in our room, which we shared. One of them brought in a Ouija board and said, "Hey, why don't we try this out for fun?" One of her friends had a spirit tethered to her. That's what she claimed. Whether or not it was true, I still don't know to this day, but she said let's go for it. I wanted nothing to do with it, but being 12 years old and curious, I observed what they were doing. They didn't follow any of the rules that you're supposed to, as far as not putting it back on a blanket, not lighting the proper candles, and other things that you're supposed to do prior to using the Ouija board. So they were just calling on spirits that they could think of and trying to communicate with them. That's when things got a little creepy. So, if I remember correctly, one of the spirits that came to the board was a woman, and she was not friendly. She started spelling out profanities and they quickly shut that down. I can't remember what the second spirit was, but it was also not friendly, and it called itself Satan. All of a sudden, one of my sister's friends started panicking. She said she saw a man out on the streets with a red and black face. We did not see said man out on the street, so I don't know if she was having a panic attack and seeing things, but who knows. The next event that happened was kind of insane and terrifying. All of a sudden, my sister started zoning out and just stared at nothing. We tried to get her attention and she had no response. Then she got up and walked downstairs, and we were confused, so we followed her. We heard something in the kitchen, so we went and checked that out. My sister is standing over the sink, taking knives from the counter in the knife holder, and she's throwing them into the sink, one after the other. We tried to get her attention, and she does not respond to us. Then, she goes and grabs the carafe off the coffee maker and drinks black coffee straight out the carafe. Mind you, she hated coffee at the time, yet she drank the whole thing. She got up and went to sit on the couch, and a couple of minutes later, she blinked and came to. She asked us why we were staring at her and how did she get downstairs. To this day, she has no memory of what happened. 21 years later, we are pretty sure that a spirit took over her body and just had fun with her. My grandma, after my mum told her what happened, came into the house and blessed it with holy water. It seemed to help for a while, and then I had a series of nightmares a year later, so I'm wondering if the holy water didn't really have much effect on the house. So, this is a lesson learned, and a disclaimer to anybody who wants to mess with a Ouija board. If you do not have real experience with it, do not use one. You never know what you're going to be invited into your home.
I'm still trying to make myself believe it was just a nightmare. I wish it was a nightmare. I mentioned playing the Ouija board 3 times. I wish I never did play it. Even now I don't know what the hell I was thinking, or if I even was at all. I think I was bored or whatever, maybe desperate to talk with a loved one. They were played at night. The first time I played, I only broke one rule. I was playing alone. I was playing on the floor of my small room. Nothing happened, so I ended the game properly, saying goodbye. The second time I still played alone. The pointer moved around, but really slow and in no direction at all. Just a circle. See, I didn't think much of this. Maybe it needed time to reply. Never landed on a letter or a number. It moved from a circle to trying to get off the board. I ended the game like last time. The third time, I asked what its name was, and it spelt out Z-O-Z-O. I tried keeping calm and ended the game. I heard of Z-O-Z-O. I knew I messed up horribly. When I tried going to sleep at about 2 in the morning, something scratched my foot. Instantly I couldn't move. I felt like I was being held down. My door was cracked open, but nothing was there. Something was definitely there. No human can get under my bed without shuffling around trash. Yes, I'm not exactly the neatest, but something has to be under my bed because I fear a human or thing crawling on all 4s. When I looked at the cracked open door and started overthinking every possibility that could happen, except for horrendous murder, in this weird second-person view, I vividly see the most twisted murder I can't bring myself to repeat. I'll just say decapitation and a deep slash over the throat in the most violent way possible. There was a shadow thing crouching down beside my parents' bed. Whatever it was, I'm banging on my neighbor's door, crying, screaming and shaking really hard. But I'm still in my bed, staring at the cracked open door, quietly crying. Then in that weird view, I'm seeing everything again until morning. That hasn't happened again, but I threw the board out and just believed it was a loop dream, until I see the same shadow thing walking casually from the hallway to the kitchen about a week ago. I'm not the only person seeing that thing. Our 3 cats see it too. One minute, they'll be playing and having fun, then they suddenly stop and stare at whatever got their attention. The next thing, they dig their claws into the rug as they run after whatever they'd seen. They end up in my room I stupidly played that game in. I'm a night owl and I'm always tense at home. My muscles often hurt because of how I'd tensed them so often. My work was supposed to be a little bit of normalcy. It did work for a while, until the encounters with them happened. We are going to be a little understaffed for a while. Some may not get a 30-minute break. It's sort of falling apart. Since that happened, my door has stayed shut. That board is at the dump now, and honestly, I'm being stared at a bit more often from the hall. The shadow that peeks around corners seems to be more curious. That's different from the shadow I've seen in my parents' room. The shadow in my parents' room was bigger, potentially taller than the curious one. It sticks around a little longer, and I can get a bit more of a look at it than a glimpse. I hope I never experience whatever that was, a nightmare. Whatever that view shift was about. Never playing that board again. Maybe it was a nightmare and I didn't know I fell asleep. Maybe I was half asleep. I was trying to sleep, but I just laid in bed, not feeling tired yet. I don't mind not being believed, being criticized. School did that more often than teaching. But this is killing me, because I was awake when this happened.
I want to share this experience in hopes to find others that may have had a similar one, or discuss what might have happened. This is 100% true, and every time I tell this story, I get goosebumps on my arms and the back of my neck. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my mother used to be into Ouija boards. She's a spiritual person, but as a kid, I was never into that type of stuff. I was into playing video games with my brother and playing outside. One night, she asked if we wanted to join. We declined, of course, and we went to go play games in our room, and she goes to do her thing in another room. As the night went on, we got tired and went to bed. My brother and I shared the same room, and we both slept on either side of the room in our twin beds. The way that my bed was situated, I could see into the hallway when I was laying down. I remember waking up that night, not sure what time it was, but I remember feeling peaceful. Usually when I would wake up, I would feel scared because it was dark, but this time, it was different. I remember it feeling like some kind of sleep paralysis. I was staring into the hallway, and I couldn't look away. Then, a bright blue figure appears. It looks like an old man, dressed in a flannel shirt with a cane. He was walking past our door and stopped, looked into our room, and I made eye contact with him. I don't remember him smiling or anything, but I felt completely at peace. I was not scared the slightest, and as a kid, I would have expected myself to lose my marbles. A second or two after we made eye contact, he looked down the hallway towards my mother's room and started walking, leaving my sight from the doorway. I went back to bed after this, not scared or frightened, just peaceful. The next morning, my mother was bringing my brother and I to school, and I started talking about what I saw. My mother burst into tears, crying hysterically, so much so that she had to pull over. I tell her the whole story, how I felt and what the man looked like. Her tears stop, and she starts to explain that she made contact with her grandfather through the Ouija board. My mother is from another country, and I've never met her side of the family, nor seen pictures of them. My mother had a rough upbringing from her mum and dad, and even now, talks about it very seldom. Her grandfather was someone she felt safe and comfortable with. When I was telling her what he looked like, she said that I described him perfectly. Even the clothes he was wearing was something she remembered. I haven't experienced something like that since. Odd things here and there, of course, but nothing like this. That blue light will forever be burned into my memory.